5,000 years ago, long before telescopes searched the sky, and long before philosophers drew diagrams of the universe, people in southern Mesopotamia imagined existence as something enclosed, not empty, not endless, not open in every direction, enclosed. That idea appears quietly at first, hidden inside hymns, temple language, royal inscriptions, myths of creation, stories of gods, and fragments of cosmology written on clay. The ancient Sumerians did not leave behind a single tablet saying, in simple modern words, "There is a wall around Earth." That is not what the evidence shows. But they did preserve a much older and more unsettling vision. The human world existed inside an ordered zone, surrounded by powers, waters, mountains, gates, and divine boundaries that no ordinary person could cross. And that raises the first mystery. Why did one of humanity's earliest civilizations imagine the world as something that needed to be bordered? Picture the land of Sumer, a flat plain of mud brick cities, reed marshes, slow rivers, burning sun, and night skies so clear that the stars would have seemed close enough to speak. There were no forests stretching endlessly to the horizon, no stone mountains rising from the city centers. The world of the Sumerians was a fragile strip of life between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, surrounded by desert, steppe, mountains, and sea. Civilization itself felt like an island. Every year, the rivers could bring fertility. Every year, they could also bring destruction. A field could become a harvest or vanish beneath floodwater. A city wall could protect a population or crumble under invasion. A temple could rise toward heaven, yet still stand on soil that cracked in drought and dissolved in rain. So when the Sumerians imagined the cosmos, they did not imagine safety as natural. Order had to be made. Order had to be guarded. Order had to be maintained. This is where the so-called wall around Earth becomes more than a strange phrase. It becomes a doorway into the Sumerian mind. In their world, boundaries were sacred. A city had walls. A temple had gates. A shrine had restricted rooms. A king had a throne. A god had a domain. Even the dead had a destination that could not be entered casually by the living. The universe was not one open space. It was a series of separated realms, each with its own rules, each watched by powers greater than human beings. What if the earliest idea of a cosmic wall was never meant to describe bricks in space? What if it described the boundary between the known and the unknowable? The Sumerian word for Earth, commonly rendered as Ki, did not simply mean a planet floating in modern astronomical space. It belonged to a worldview in which heaven above and earth below were paired realities. Heaven, was the high realm of divine authority. Earth, Kai, was the human and cultivated realm, the place where cities were built and offerings were made. Around this ordered world lay dangerous margins. The margins mattered. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian stories, the edges of the world are rarely empty. They are places of mountains, deep waters, darkness, strange beings, distant lands, and divine secrets. Heroes travel toward them only under extraordinary conditions. Gods establish order by separating realms that were once mingled. Monsters appear when boundaries weaken. Floodwaters rise when the normal limits of creation fail. To modern ears, this may sound symbolic, and much of it likely is. Historians generally understand these stories as mythological, religious, and cosmological language, not engineering reports. Archaeologists have found city walls, temple platforms, boundary stones, and clay tablets. They have not found physical evidence that Sumerians built, or believed humans built, a literal structure surrounding the entire planet. But the absence of a literal wall does not make the ancient idea less powerful. In fact, it may make it more revealing, because the deepest ancient fears are often hidden in symbols. A wall is never only a wall. It tells us that something is inside and something else is outside. It says there is a line. It says crossing that line matters. It says order can be lost. The Sumerians lived with this truth every day. Their cities were not decorative settlements. They were organized worlds. Within the wall, there were homes, canals, granaries, workshops, priests, scribes, music, law, and ritual. Outside the wall, there could be wilderness, enemies, hunger, spirits, and uncertainty. The wall did not only defend bodies, it defended meaning. Could their cosmic boundaries have worked the same way? Ancient texts describe gods assigning roles, separating waters, establishing kingship, measuring lands, and fixing destinies. These are not random images. They reflect a civilization obsessed with the difference between order and chaos. The Sumerian universe was not born secure. It had to be arranged. It had to be named. It had to be protected from returning to confusion. This is one of the most important keys to understanding the mystery. When modern people hear wall around Earth, they often imagine a hidden physical structure, a lost technology, or a forbidden truth concealed by elites. But ancient Mesopotamian texts usually speak in a different language. Their walls can be cosmic divisions. Their gates can be spiritual thresholds. Their monsters can be embodiments of chaos. Their waters can be both real and mythic, both river and abyss, both geography and terror. Yet the strange question remains: why did these images appear so often? Why did the ancient imagination keep returning to borders, gates, guarded places, forbidden regions, and dangerous outer zones? One answer begins with the landscape itself. Mesopotamia taught people that life depended on control. Canals controlled water, walls controlled enemies, rituals controlled divine anger, calendars controlled time, writing controlled memory, law controlled society. Without boundaries, everything could collapse. But another answer reaches deeper. The Sumerians may have sensed that human beings live inside a thin circle of understanding. Beyond the city is the wilderness. Beyond the wilderness is the foreign land. Beyond the horizon is the mythic edge. Beyond death is the underworld. Beyond heaven is divine secrecy. At every level of existence, there is a boundary humans can approach but not fully cross. This is why the idea of a wall around Earth still grips the imagination. Not because it proves a literal barrier in the sky, but because it speaks to an ancient feeling that has never disappeared. We still live inside walls of knowledge. We know more than the Sumerians knew about planets, stars, gravity, and galaxies. But the emotional structure remains strangely familiar. We still ask what lies beyond the visible universe. We still wonder whether reality has edges. We still fear what may enter when systems fail. We still build borders, maps, firewalls, shelters, vaults, and theories to protect the fragile order we depend on. The Sumerian records do not hand us a simple answer. They give us something more haunting: a pattern, a world enclosed by meaning, a civilization surrounded by uncertainty, a cosmos where boundaries were sacred because beyond them waited forces that could not be controlled. So the first clue is not a stone wall hidden above the atmosphere. It is an ancient idea carved into the way Mesopotamians described existence itself. Earth, in their imagination, was not merely a place where humans lived. It was a protected zone inside a larger mystery. And if there was a boundary around the human world, the most disturbing question is not where it stood. The real question is what the ancient scribes believed was waiting outside it. Where does the world end? To a modern mind, the question sounds almost childish. Earth is a sphere. It has no edge. Travel far enough in one direction, and eventually the path curves back upon itself. Satellites photograph the planet from orbit. Maps cover every continent. The unknown has been pushed farther away, into the ocean depths and outer space. But for the people of ancient Sumer, the world did have edges, not edges like the rim of a flatboard. Necessarily, the surviving texts do not give us a complete technical map from the earliest Sumerian period. They do not offer one single diagram explaining exactly how every scribe imagined the cosmos. What they give instead are repeated images: the land beneath heaven, the distant mountains, the surrounding waters, the lower world, the divine realm above, and the dangerous places where human order faded into something else. In that world, Earth was not a planet. It was a living stage. Cities stood at the center of meaning. Fields stretched around them. Canals carried life through the soil. Temples rose like sacred anchors between the human realm and the gods. Beyond the cultivated land stood regions that felt less stable: the steppe, the desert, the mountain roots, the marshes, the sea, and foreign territories where different peoples, languages, and gods appeared. For the Sumerians, geography and sacred imagination were not separated the way they are for us. A mountain was not only a mountain, it could be a cosmic threshold. A river was not only water, it could be a divine force. A city was not only a settlement, it could be the earthly seat of a god. A horizon was not only a visual limit, it could be the place where heaven seemed to touch the earth. This is the second key to the mystery. The boundary around Earth may have begun as the boundary around the known world. Imagine standing on the roof of a temple in Uruk before dawn. The city below is still dark. The smell of baked mud brick, animals, smoke, and river reeds hangs in the air. In the distance, the flat plain slowly brightens. The first light rises at the far edge of sight. To someone watching from that height, the world appears contained beneath a dome of sky. The stars vanish into morning. The sun arrives from somewhere beyond the visible land. Each day, it crosses overhead and disappears again into the west. Where does it go? That question mattered. Ancient Mesopotamians observed the sky carefully. Their later descendants in Babylonia became famous for astronomical records, but the roots of sky watching reach deep into earlier temple culture. The heavens were not random. They were full of signs, patterns, cycles, and divine messages. The sun, moon, planets, and stars moved with terrifying regularity, as if following roads that no human foot could walk. If the sky had roads, did it also have borders? If the sun entered and exited the visible world, were there gates? The Sumerian imagination often placed divine or supernatural significance at the limits of ordinary experience. The Far East, where the sun rose, and the Far West, where it vanished, were not meaningless directions. They became charged with mystery. Mountains at the edges of the world could become places of passage. The horizon became a veil. What makes this fascinating is that the Sumerians were not isolated dreamers inventing fantasies in darkness. They were practical builders, administrators, traders, farmers, and record keepers. They measured fields. They counted grain. They made contracts. They tracked labor. they understood real boundaries with extreme seriousness. A boundary in Sumerian life could decide ownership, taxation, irrigation rights, temple property, and political power. Boundary stones, land records, and administrative tablets show that territory was not vague. It was measured, claimed, protected, and disputed. A canal could mark a line. A wall could define a city. A field could belong to a temple or household. A border was not abstract. It was a matter of survival. So when cosmic language uses the imagery of boundaries, it grows from daily experience. The Sumerians knew that order required lines. The mystery is that they projected this logic onto the entire universe. The human world occupied a middle place. Above was heaven, the domain of the high gods. Below was the underworld, the land of the dead. Around were the unpredictable edges where the familiar dissolved. The cosmos was arranged vertically and horizontally at the same time, like a sacred architecture with levels, roads, gates, and limits. Modern historians generally see this as religious cosmology, not primitive science in the modern sense. Ancient people were not trying to write a physics textbook. They were answering different questions. Where do the gods dwell? Where do the dead go? Why does the sun return? Why do floods come? Why must cities perform rituals? Why is civilization fragile? And hidden inside those questions is a deeper one. What keeps the world from falling apart? For Sumer, the answer was not nature alone. It was divine order. The gods established places, assigned functions, fixed destinies, and gave kingship meaning. The world continued because powers greater than humans maintained its structure. If those powers withdrew, if boundaries failed, if the waters rose or enemies breached the wall, chaos could return. This is why the idea of Earth's edge felt dangerous. The edge was not simply far away. It was where order became uncertain. At the edge, maps weakened. At the edge, language changed. At the edge, gods might be unfamiliar. At the edge, the dead, demons, monsters, or divine messengers might appear. A modern person may hear this and think the Sumerians were afraid of what they did not understand. But that is too simple. They were also fascinated. The edge of the world was a place of revelation. Heroes went there to learn what ordinary people could not know. Kings boasted of reaching distant lands. Myths sent divine figures across boundaries to gain power, wisdom, or terrifying knowledge. The end of the world was not only a wall, it was a test. This gives the ancient boundary a double meaning. It protected the human world from what lay outside, but it also concealed what humans most wanted to discover. The line was sacred because crossing it could destroy a person, transform a person, or reveal a truth that did not belong in ordinary life. Perhaps that is why the old stories feel so alive. They do not describe a universe that is empty beyond the horizon. They describe a universe that is crowded with hidden structure. Behind the visible world are roads of the gods. Beneath the soil is the land of the dead. Beyond the far mountains are places where creation becomes unstable. Above the sky are powers that watch, judge, and decide. So where did Earth end for the Sumerians? It ended wherever human order stopped being certain. It ended at the mountain pass, the sea's horizon, the desert's silence, the temple gate, the grave, the roof line where stars began, and the invisible border between what could be named and what could only be feared. And if the world ended at the limits of order, then the boundary around Earth was not only built to keep something out, it may also have been built to keep humanity from seeing too much. What if the edge of the world was not made of stone, but water? To the people of southern Mesopotamia, water was never only a blessing. It was life, but it was also threat. It filled canals, nourished barley, carried boats, and made cities possible. Yet the same force could rise without warning, tear through fields, swallow homes, ruin stored grain, and remind human beings that civilization stood on unstable ground. This is one reason ancient Mesopotamian cosmology returns again and again to primordial waters, deep waters, sweet waters, bitter waters, and the terrifying possibility that the world humans know floats beside forces older than order itself. The Sumerians lived in a land shaped by rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates did not merely pass through their world, they defined it. Their floods were less predictable than the Nile in Egypt, and their shifting channels could alter the fate of entire settlements. A city might thrive beside water for generations, then watch the river withdraw or turn destructive. The landscape taught a severe lesson. Water gives form, and water removes form. So when ancient texts speak of waters surrounding, underlying, or threatening the world, the image was not abstract. It came from lived experience. The known land of Sumer was bordered by different watery realms. To the south lay the marshes and the Persian Gulf. These wetlands were mysterious, fertile, difficult to control, and filled with reeds, birds, fish, hidden channels, and shifting passages. The marsh was neither solid land nor open sea. It was a borderland, a place where categories blurred. Beyond the marshes lay salt water. To modern geography, this is simply the Gulf. To ancient imagination, salt water could become something much larger, the bitter sea, the outer expanse, the dangerous surrounding unknown. In later Mesopotamian tradition, world maps and cosmological descriptions sometimes picture the inhabited land encircled by a cosmic ocean. These later sources cannot simply be projected backward unchanged onto every early Sumerian belief, but they preserve a wider Mesopotamian pattern. The world of humans was imagined as bordered by waters that marked the limit of ordinary life. Water became a boundary, but it was a strange boundary. Because it moved, a wall stands still. Water creeps, rises, floods, reflects, drowns, opens roads, and closes them. A city wall can be repaired with bricks. A cosmic sea cannot be repaired by human hands. It is a living border, one that must be respected. This may explain why ancient Mesopotamian myths often begin not with land, but with waters that existed before the ordered world. In Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, the deep is not merely physical depth, it is a sacred and dangerous region associated with creation, wisdom, fertility, and sometimes chaos. The Apsu, often described as the subterranean freshwater deep in later Akkadian texts, represents hidden waters beneath the earth. Tiamat, in the Babylonian creation epic, is associated with the saltwater sea and becomes a terrifying figure of primordial power. Here, the mystery sharpens. If waters existed before the present order, then the world was not created from nothing in the way many modern religious traditions imagine creation. In Mesopotamian myth, order often emerges through separation, naming, combat, and arrangement. Land must be distinguished from water. Heaven must be separated from earth. Divine territories must be assigned. Boundaries must be fixed. Creation is not only making, creation is dividing. This is where the wall around Earth becomes more haunting. A boundary around the world may not have been imagined primarily as a defense against an army from the sky. It may have been a defense against the return of the unshaped waters, the original condition before cities, before names, before fields, before kingship, before offerings, before humans knew their place. Could the ancient fear have been that the world was always in danger of being unmade? The flood traditions suggest exactly that possibility. In Mesopotamian stories, flood is not ordinary weather. It is cosmic failure. The boundaries between river, field, city, sea, and sky collapse. The waters move where they are not supposed to move. Human order disappears beneath a surface that erases difference. Walls, roads, houses, graves, temples, and fields all become one drowned plain. That image would have been psychologically overwhelming to people whose survival depended on canals, levees, and controlled irrigation. A canal is water under authority. A flood is water without authority. The bitter waters at the edge of the world, then, were not only distant geography, they symbolized the possibility that beyond human order lay an older and more powerful state of existence, a state where nothing was separated, nothing was stable, and no wall could be trusted. Yet water was also sacred. This is the paradox. The same deep that threatened order could also hold wisdom. The god Enki, one of the most important deities in Sumerian religion, is associated with fresh water, wisdom, craft, creation, and the subterranean deep. His city, Eridu, was remembered as one of the oldest and most sacred centers. In myths, Enki is clever, creative, protective, and unpredictable. He belongs to the waters beneath, but he is not simply monstrous. He represents the hidden intelligence inside the deep. So the watery boundary was not purely evil. It was dangerous because it was powerful. It could destroy cities, but it could also nourish them. It could hide monsters, but it could also hide wisdom. It could mark the world's edge, but it could also serve as a path for trade, exploration, divine journeys, and mythic transformation. What kind of boundary both protects and tempts? The sea does stand at the southern edge of the marshes at dusk. The reeds darken. The water reflects the last fire of the sun. Birds move like shadows across the surface. Somewhere beyond, the open salt water begins, stretching farther than the eye can measure. For a Sumerian, that horizon might not have looked like an invitation to leisure or adventure. It may have looked like the visible skin of a deeper mystery. Beyond it were foreign lands. Beyond it were storms. Beyond it were gods whose names might not be known. Beyond it was the place where the world no longer behaved like the city. This is why the image of encircling waters matters. It does not require a literal brick wall around Earth to create a sense of enclosure. The sea itself becomes a wall, but one made from motion, depth, danger, and divine memory. And if the world was surrounded by bitter waters, the question becomes darker. Were those waters protecting humanity from what lay beyond them? Or were they holding back something ancient that had once covered everything? What if the sun did not simply rise and set? What if, to ancient eyes, it passed through guarded places at the ends of the world? In the flat river plains of southern Mesopotamia, mountains were not ordinary features of daily life. The great cities of Sumer stood in low alluvial land, built from mud brick, reeds, and river clay. Their skylines were made by human hands walls, temples, platforms, gates, and stepped towers. Natural mountains belonged to the distance. They rose beyond the familiar plain in lands associated with foreign peoples, minerals, timber, storms, gods, and danger. This made mountains powerful in the Sumerian imagination. A mountain was not only high ground, it was a border between worlds. To the east and north, mountain ranges framed the Mesopotamian world. Traders and armies crossed difficult routes to reach highland regions where stone, metals, and timber could be obtained. These materials were precious because Sumer itself lacked many of them. Every block of stone, every beam of cedar, every glittering metal object carried a memory of distant lands. The mountain was not just scenery. It was the source of things the plain could not produce. But the mountain was also a place of uncertainty. Roads into the highlands were dangerous. Languages changed. Political control weakened. Weather shifted. Wild animals, raiders, and unfamiliar gods entered the imagination. A city could be measured, taxed, and ritually organized. A mountain could not be controlled so easily. So when ancient stories speak of cosmic mountains, sunrise mountains, distant peaks, or divine high places, they are not random decorations. They reflect a deep Mesopotamian feeling that the limits of the world were not empty spaces. They were raised thresholds. The sun itself seemed to confirm this. Each morning, it appeared from the edge of the land. Each evening, it vanished beyond another edge. The daily path of the sun created a cosmic drama that every person could witness. The sky brightened, shadows retreated, heat descended, then light faded, stars returned, and darkness crossed the plain. Where did the sun go at night? Modern astronomy answers with rotation. Ancient myth answered with journey. In wider Mesopotamian tradition, the sun god, known in Sumerian as Utu and later in Akkadian as Shamash, was not merely a bright disk. He was a divine judge, a traveler, a witness, and a power connected with truth. Because the sun saw the world from above, it could expose hidden things. Because it returned each day, it suggested order. Because it disappeared into the west, it raised the possibility that its path crossed realms humans could not enter. The rising and setting points became charged with sacred meaning. The horizon was not a line on a map. It was a door. Imagine a dawn over the Mesopotamian plain. The fields are silver with morning damp. Canals cut dark lines through the earth. A temple platform catches the first light before the alleys below. For a moment, the sun appears not as a distant star, but as a being arriving through a gate no human hand can open. Why would the gods need gates at the edges of the world? The answer may lie in the ancient connection between movement and permission. In Mesopotamian religious thought, important transitions were rarely uncontrolled. Temples had entrances, cities had gates, palaces had guarded courts, rituals required proper words, times, offerings, and purity. Passage from one state to another required order. If the sun traveled between visible and invisible realms, then its movement also needed structure. The far mountains could become the imagined architecture of that structure. They could mark the places where the sun entered and exited the human world. Later myths and epics from Mesopotamia describe heroes traveling to distant mountains associated with the sun's course, divine secrets, or the edge of ordinary existence. These stories do not give a single uniform cosmology, but they preserve a pattern. To reach the far boundary is to approach a place of supernatural passage. This is not the same as saying the Sumerians believed in a literal ring wall of rock surrounding the planet. The evidence does not allow that simple claim, but it does show that elevated borders, distant mountains, and horizon gates played a role in how Mesopotamians imagined the structure of reality. A mountain can function like a wall without being called one. It blocks sight. It separates lands. It hides what lies beyond. It touches the sky in appearance. It interrupts travel. It gathers clouds and storms. It stands as a visible sign that human movement has limits. That may be why mountains often become sacred in ancient civilizations. In Egypt, the western horizon was associated with the realm of the dead. In the Hebrew tradition, mountains become places of divine revelation. In Greek myth, Olympus becomes the dwelling place of gods. In Mesopotamia, artificial temple mountains rose from the plain, perhaps because the people of the lowlands wanted to create a controlled meeting place between earth and heaven. The natural mountain was distant, dangerous, and divine. The temple mountain was brought into the city. This reveals something remarkable. Sumerian cities did not only defend themselves with walls, they built vertical symbols, structures that reached upward, as if trying to reproduce the sacred boundary inside the safe space of civilization. The edge of the world was far away, but the idea of the edge could be recreated in brick. A ziggurat or temple platform was not just a tall building. It was a statement here. In the middle of the human world, the realms may touch under divine supervision. That phrase matters, under divine supervision, because uncontrolled contact between realms was frightening. A human who wandered too far might not return. A god who crossed a boundary in anger might bring plague, drought, war, or flood. A dead person who failed to remain properly separated from the living could become restless. A demon crossing into human space required ritual defense. Boundaries did not exist because the universe was empty. They existed because the universe was full of powers, full of roads, full of hidden regions, full of beings whose movement had to be regulated. The mountains of sunrise, then, may represent one of the earliest forms of the cosmic wall idea. Not a smooth barrier, but a jagged rim of sacred geography. A place where light enters, a place where darkness begins, a place where gods travel, a place where human certainty ends. And the most unsettling detail is this: in ancient myth, those who reach the far boundary rarely find simple answers. They find guardians, tests, strange landscapes, divine warnings, and knowledge that comes at a cost. So if the mountains marked the place where the world opened and closed each day, what stood behind those peaks when the sun disappeared? What if the sky was not empty space? What if it was a ceiling, a structure, a vast divine surface stretched above the human world? To modern people, the sky feels open because science has shown us what lies beyond it. Atmosphere, orbit, planets, stars, galaxies, and distances almost impossible to imagine. But the ancient Sumerian world did not look upward into empty infinity. It looked upward into order. The sky was not merely blue air by day and darkness by night. It was the realm of An, the high heaven, the place of authority, distance, and divine command. The name itself carried weight. In Sumerian religion, An was associated with heaven and supreme divine status, even when other gods became more active in myths and city cults. Heaven was not background. It was sovereignty, and sovereignty requires separation. A king sits apart from common people. A shrine is separated from ordinary rooms. A sacred statue is hidden, washed, clothed, and fed through ritual. A throne room is not a marketplace. A temple courtyard is not a street. In the Sumerian imagination, holiness was not casual access. It was nearness controlled by rules. So what separated humans from heaven? The answer was not always described in the same way, and ancient texts do not give one single mechanical explanation. But across Mesopotamian thought, heaven appears as an ordered region above the earth, a realm that could be entered only by gods, certain divine messengers, and in rare mythic cases, extraordinary beings. It was not a place humans simply climbed into. It was above, remote, powerful, and guarded by its very nature. The sky itself became the boundary. This may be one of the most important clues in the idea of a cosmic wall. A wall does not have to stand around the sides of the world. It can hang above it. It can separate the human realm from the divine realm. It can be the visible barrier everyone sees every day, but no one can touch. The blue arch overhead, the star field at night, the path of the moon, the fixed order of constellations. All of it suggested that the world was covered by a heavenly structure. The ancient eye did not see outer space. It saw a sacred dome of signs. That dome was alive with meaning. The stars were not random lights. The moon was not a dead rock. The planets were not silent bodies moving through gravity. In Mesopotamian tradition, celestial bodies were associated with gods, omens, calendars, royal decisions, agricultural cycles, and the fate of cities. The sky was a written surface, and priests learned to read it. This is where the mystery deepens. If the sky could be read, then the boundary above Earth was not only a barrier, it was also a message. Imagine scribes standing in temple courtyards at night, looking upward after the heat of the day had vanished. Around them, the city rests behind its walls. Oil lamps flicker. A priest watches the moon's position. A scribe records an appearance, a disappearance, a strange alignment, a halo, an eclipse, a warning. Above them, the heavens stretch like a tablet too large for human hands. Could the gods have written their intentions on the wall of the sky? This idea gives the firmament a double role. It separates, but it also reveals. It hides the gods, but it shows their signs. It prevents humans from entering divine space, but it allows messages to descend. The Sumerians and later Mesopotamians were not alone in seeing the heavens as a structured boundary. Many ancient cultures imagined the sky as a solid or ordered covering. In Egyptian imagery, the sky could be personified as the goddess Nut, arching over the earth. In later Hebrew cosmology, the heavens include a firmament associated with separation of waters. In Greek thought, heaven could be imagined as a high enclosing vault. These are not identical systems, and they should not be collapsed into one simple idea, but they show a widespread ancient pattern. The sky was often understood as architecture. The heavens were built, or at least, they were arranged. In Mesopotamian myth, creation frequently involves separating what was once joined. Heaven and earth are divided. Waters are given limits. Gods receive domains. Names and destinies are established. The universe becomes habitable because it is structured. Without separation, there is no world fit for humans. This gives the heavenly boundary a frightening importance. If heaven and earth were ever to merge uncontrolled, the result would not be enlightenment. It could be catastrophe. Divine power was not automatically gentle. Gods could bless, but they could also destroy. Their nearness required ritual management. Their anger could bring famine, disease, defeat, or flood. The distance between heaven and earth protected humans as much as it humbled them. What if the sky was a mercy? That may sound strange, but in ancient religion, distance can be protective. A god too close may overwhelm the human world. A sacred object touched improperly may endanger the person who touches it. A forbidden place entered without permission may bring death or madness. The boundary keeps realms from colliding. So the heavenly wall was not necessarily built to imprison humanity. It may have been imagined as a necessary division between mortal life and divine intensity. Yet this division created longing. Humans looked upward and saw what they could not reach. They built temples higher. They placed offerings before gods. They performed rituals at dawn, dusk, new moon, harvest, enthronement, and death. They asked for signs. They feared silence. They watched the sky because the boundary above them was also the surface from which fate seemed to speak. This is why the firmament matters in the larger mystery of Earth's enclosure. The boundary was not only outside the world horizontally, beyond seas and mountains. It was above every field, every roof, every grave, every king, every slave, every child. No one could escape it. The richest city and the poorest hut stood beneath the same unreachable heaven, and beneath that heaven, human life felt watched. The sun saw injustice. The moon measured time. The stars marked cycles. Eclipses disturbed kings. Storms announced divine power. Lightning split the air like a weapon from above. Rain could mean blessing. Drought could mean abandonment. The sky was a barrier, but never a silent one. For the Sumerians, the wall above Earth may have been visible every day. It was the place where light moved, where divine signs appeared, where storms gathered, where prayers rose, and where human ambition stopped. But a boundary that sends messages is more unsettling than a boundary that merely blocks passage. Because if the heavens were speaking, then someone, or something, stood on the other side. And if the sky was the wall between humans and the divine realm, why did the ancient world believe that certain signs were allowed to pass through it? What if the deepest wall around the human world was not above the sky or beyond the horizon, but under our feet? The Sumerian universe was not only divided outward and upward, it also opened downward, into hidden waters, buried darkness, and the land of the dead. Beneath the visible world lay regions that ordinary people could not enter and return from unchanged. The ground was not just soil. It was a sealed surface. Every burial proved it. A body disappeared into the earth. Offerings were placed with the dead. Names were remembered. Rituals continued. The living remained above, breathing sunlight. The dead belonged below, in a realm that could be imagined, feared, fed, and spoken of, but not freely visited. This lower boundary may be one of the most powerful forms of the ancient cosmic wall. A city wall protects people from enemies outside. A sky wall separates mortals from divine heaven. But the earth itself separates the living from the dead. And unlike a city gate, this threshold usually opens in only one direction. That made the ground sacred and terrifying. To the Sumerians, the world below was not empty. It contained the underworld, often called Kur in Sumerian texts, a word that could also carry meanings connected with mountain, foreign land, or netherworld, depending on context. This ambiguity matters. It suggests that the below was not always imagined as a neat underground chamber in the modern sense. It could be distant, deep, dark, mountainous, foreign, and unreachable all at once. The underworld was not simply a place. It was a condition beyond ordinary life. In myths, entering it required crossing rules. Divine beings who descended could not ignore its laws. The dead were not free wanderers in a paradise of light. Many Mesopotamian descriptions present the netherworld as gloomy, dusty, restrictive, and unavoidable. It was a realm where status might continue in altered form, where proper burial mattered, where offerings from descendants could affect the dead, and where neglect could turn memory into hunger. What kind of world needs a border between the living and the dead? A world afraid of mixture. The living and the dead had to remain connected through ritual, but separated by law. Too much separation meant forgotten ancestors, restless spirits, and broken family duty. Too much contact meant haunting, impurity, and danger. The boundary had to be maintained with care. This is the same logic found in other parts of Sumerian civilization. Water must be channeled, not allowed to flood. Gods must be honored, not casually approached. Cities must be enclosed, not left open. The dead must be remembered, not released without order. The underworld was a containment zone, not because the dead were evil, but because death itself was powerful. It spread across every human life. It could not be defeated by kingship, wealth, beauty, wisdom, or city walls. The greatest ruler and the poorest laborer shared the same final direction downward. This made the Earth's lower boundary more universal than any political border. Everyone lived above it. Everyone would pass through it. No one fully knew what waited beyond it. Beneath the Earth also lay the deep waters. In Mesopotamian tradition, especially through the figure of Enki, the subterranean freshwater deep was connected with wisdom, creation, fertility, and hidden power. This creates a strange contrast. Below was death, but below was also life. Giving water, beneath the soil were graves, but also the source of abundance. Seeds disappeared into the ground and returned as crops. Bodies disappeared into the ground and did not return. The same depth held hope and terror. This may explain why the lower world was never a simple hell in the later moral sense. It was not always presented as a place of punishment for the wicked. It was the great destination, the shadowed continuation, the realm behind the locked floor of existence. Some texts imply misery. Others focus on ritual obligation. But the central feeling remains once a person crosses below. The structure of reality changes. The earth keeps its secrets. Picture a burial beneath the floor of a house, or in a cemetery outside a settlement. The living continue their meals, marriages, disputes, and offerings above. Underneath, the dead remain near, but unreachable. Their presence is intimate and distant at the same time. They are family, but no longer part of the visible household. They belong to memory, ritual, and earth. Could the earliest wall around humanity have been the grave itself? A wall does not need height to divide. It only needs a threshold. The surface of the earth is the oldest threshold humans know. Above it, breath. Below it, silence. Above it, speech. Below it, names carved, remembered, or lost. Above it, fire and food. Below it, dust. Ancient Mesopotamians understood that such a boundary could be disturbed. Improper burial, neglected offerings, violent death, or ritual failure could create danger. Ghosts and restless dead appear in later Mesopotamian texts as beings who trouble the living when order has broken down. Again, the problem is not simply fear of spirits. It is fear of a failed boundary. The dead are supposed to remain in their realm. The living are supposed to remain in theirs. When the line blurs, the world becomes unsafe. This lower boundary also gives a darker meaning to the idea of what the wall was built to keep out. It was not only keeping outer monsters away from Earth, it was keeping death in its proper place. It was keeping the dead from flooding the living world. It was keeping the ancient depths from opening without permission. And still, humans could not stop thinking about it. They sang of descent. They buried offerings. They invoked ancestors. They feared ghosts. They imagined gates below. They told stories of divine beings who entered the netherworld and learned that even gods must obey certain laws. That is the most unsettling part. If even gods could be trapped by the rules of the lower realm, then the boundary beneath Earth was older than kings, older than cities, perhaps older than divine comfort itself. So, what was under the world? Not emptiness. A hidden realm of water, memory, dust, ancestors, law, hunger, and silence. And if the earth itself sealed that realm away, who decided when the gate below could open? What kind of world needs guards at its edges? Ancient Mesopotamian stories are filled with thresholds, doors, gates, mountain passes, temple entrances, city walls, river crossings, underworld portals, heavenly roads, and distant borders appear again and again as places where reality becomes dangerous. A threshold is never neutral. It is the place where one condition ends and another begins. And in Sumerian imagination, such places were rarely left unprotected. The ancient world did not picture the boundary of existence as an empty line. It pictured watched places, guarded places, places where a traveler could be stopped, questioned, stripped, judged, warned, or destroyed. The closer one came to the limits of ordinary human life, the more likely one was to encounter a being whose purpose was not simply to attack, but to control passage. This is a crucial difference. A monster blocks. A guardian decides. That distinction matters because many strange beings in Mesopotamian tradition were not merely enemies of humankind. Some were terrifying, but protective. Some stood at entrances to keep harmful forces away. Some appeared on amulets, palace reliefs, and ritual objects as defenders. Their frightening appearance was part of their function. To protect a boundary from chaos, a being had to frighten chaos itself. The Sumerians and their Mesopotamian descendants understood something psychologically powerful. A guarded doorway feels more sacred than an open one. A city gate was not only a hole in a wall, it was a controlled point of entry. Goods passed through it. Soldiers defended it. Messengers arrived at it. Outsiders were watched there. Legal and public activities could occur near it. The gate represented both vulnerability and authority. Whoever controlled the gate controlled the movement between inside and outside. Temples worked the same way, but with greater intensity. A temple was not designed as a public hall where anyone could wander freely into the most sacred chamber. Access was layered. Courtyards, doors, ritual restrictions, priestly roles, offerings, purification, and sacred objects created a graded approach to divine presence. The god's inner space was protected because divine nearness was powerful. The boundary did not only keep thieves away, it protected the order between human and divine. This habit of guarded space shaped the Mesopotamian cosmos. If cities need gates, and temples need gates, then why would the universe not need gates? In myth, this logic becomes cosmic. The underworld has entrances. Heaven has remote access. Distant mountains hold hidden routes. Divine beings travel by roads unavailable to mortals. Humans who approach forbidden regions do not simply walk in. They meet conditions. The figure of the gatekeeper is therefore one of the most revealing images in ancient religion. Gatekeepers stand between worlds. They belong to neither side completely. They face outward and inward at once. They know the rules of crossing. Their presence implies that reality is not a continuous open field, but an ordered system of restricted passages. A gatekeeper also suggests something disturbing. The danger is not only outside, the danger is movement itself. When something crosses from one realm into another, balance changes. A god entering a city can bring blessing, but also overwhelming force. A ghost entering a household can bring terror. A demon entering a body can bring sickness. A human entering the underworld can break the order of life. A flood entering the city turns streets into death channels. The crossing is the crisis. This is why ancient rituals often focused on protection at entrances. Doorways were vulnerable because they were necessary. A completely sealed house is safe but useless. A completely open house is exposed. The doorway must allow the right things in and keep the wrong things out. The same idea appears in protective figures placed near gates and thresholds. Hybrid beings with animal bodies, human features, wings, claws, horns, or supernatural expressions were not always signs of evil. They could be apotropaic, meaning they were meant to turn away harm. Their strangeness was a weapon. Their bodies combined categories because they defended places where categories might break. Why would a guardian need to look unnatural? Perhaps because the boundary itself was unnatural. A door between worlds cannot be protected by something ordinary. It requires a being that belongs to the border, not fully animal, not fully human, not fully divine in the highest sense. A liminal creature for a liminal place. The Mesopotamian imagination was rich with such beings. Some later examples are better known from Assyrian and Babylonian art, such as colossal protective figures placed at palace gateways. These belong to periods later than early Sumer, but they continue an older Mesopotamian fascination with guarded entrances and supernatural protection. Their massive bodies, calm faces, wings, and animal strength communicate a single message: what stands inside is ordered, royal, sacred, and defended. This same message can be felt in mythic geography. The edge of the world is never described like an abandoned road. It is charged with presence. A hero traveling toward the limits of human experience must pass beings who mark the shift from normal space into sacred danger. The guardian is not random decoration. It is proof that the boundary is real. And if the boundary is real, then something beyond it must matter. A wall without a guard may be merely practical. A wall with a guardian becomes theological. It says the line is not only physical, it is moral, cosmic, and dangerous. Crossing it without permission is not trespass. It is violation. This may help explain why the idea of a wall around Earth attracts so much modern fascination. People imagine the wall, but the ancient mind may have been just as concerned with the watchers. Who stands at the boundary? Who decides what may enter? Who decides what must remain outside? In Sumerian religion, the answer was not one simple figure. Different gods, spirits, demons, attendants, and mythic beings appear in different contexts. The ancient records are fragmentary, and they do not present a single universal border guard stationed at a global wall. But the pattern is unmistakable. Thresholds require control, and the more sacred the threshold, the more dangerous the crossing. A temple door, a city gate, a mountain pass, a grave, the horizon, the entrance to the netherworld. Each one repeats the same symbolic grammar. The world is divided. The divisions are meaningful. Movement between them must be regulated. This turns the wall around Earth into something far more complex than a barrier. It becomes a system of gates and guardians, a cosmic borderland where permission matters more than distance. The ancient fear was not simply that something might be outside. It was that something might cross inside without being seen, named, judged, or stopped. And that brings the mystery to its sharpest edge. If the guardians existed to protect the ordered world, what kind of beings were they meant to recognize before humans ever could? What if the greatest threat outside the ordered world was not an enemy army, but a memory of creation before order existed? Ancient Mesopotamian mythology does not imagine chaos as simple darkness. Chaos is alive, fertile, ancient, crowded, and powerful. It is not empty space waiting to be filled. It is the condition that exists when boundaries have not yet been fixed, when waters have not yet been separated, when names have not yet been assigned. When gods themselves struggle to decide what reality will become, this is where the monsters enter. Modern readers often treat ancient monsters as fantasy creatures, decorative symbols invented to make stories exciting. But in Mesopotamian thought, monstrous beings often carry a deeper function. They show what happens when categories break: a lion-headed eagle, a serpent dragon, a horned hybrid, a creature of sea and storm. These are not merely strange animals. They are beings from the borderlands of imagination, where the divisions that hold the world together begin to blur. A monster is a warning that order can fail. The most famous example comes from the later Babylonian creation epic, where Tiamat, associated with the saltwater sea, becomes the mother of terrifying beings in a cosmic conflict. This is not an early Sumerian tablet in its original form, and it should not be treated as though every Sumerian believed the exact same version. But it belongs to the larger Mesopotamian tradition and preserves a powerful idea: the ordered world is established through conflict with primordial forces. In that story world, chaos is not destroyed because it is weak. Chaos must be overcome because it is immense. Tiamat's monstrous army includes beings with venom, fangs, roaring power, and supernatural terror. Their bodies seem designed to overwhelm human categories. They are not simply animals. They are not simply gods. They are powers from an age when reality had not yet become safe for cities, fields, calendars, and kings. Why would ancient scribes describe primordial beings in such frightening forms? Because fear needs a body. A flood is terrifying, but a flood with a face becomes myth. A storm is terrifying, but a storm with wings becomes a divine enemy. The sea is terrifying, but the sea, imagined as a mother of monsters, becomes a memory of the world before boundaries. The Sumerians knew monsters in their own mythic language as well. One of the most striking is the Anzu bird, a powerful creature associated in later traditions with the theft of the Tablet of Destinies. The story appears in different versions, and its details shift through time, but its core image is unforgettable. A monstrous being seizes the authority that organizes the cosmos. The Tablet of Destinies is not just an object. It represents command over order itself. If such a thing is stolen, the universe is not merely robbed. It is destabilized. That is the true horror. A monster outside the wall is dangerous. A monster holding the laws of reality is something else entirely. This theme appears repeatedly in Mesopotamian imagination. The terrifying being is not frightening only because it can kill. It is frightening because it disrupts the structure that makes life meaningful. It threatens kingship, divine command, ritual order, cosmic separation, or the safety of the human realm. In other words, monsters are not random threats. They are anti-boundary forces. They belong to the world before walls. This helps explain why monstrous beings often appear near edges, watery depths, remote mountains, wilderness, underworld passages, and divine thresholds. These are places where human order thins. A farmer's field has rows. A city has streets. A temple has measured spaces. A canal has banks. But the wilderness is irregular. The sea has no visible road. The mountain hides valleys. The underworld cannot be surveyed. The monster belongs where measurement fails. Ancient people did not need to believe every monster was zoological fact for the imagery to matter. Myth does not work only by reporting. It works by revealing the emotional architecture of a culture. When Mesopotamian stories place monsters at the margins, they are telling us where fear lived. Fear lived where the map ended. Fear lived where water became bottomless. Fear lived where the dead were not quiet. Fear lived where divine authority could be stolen. Fear lived where separation collapsed. This gives the supposed wall around Earth a new meaning. The wall was not imagined merely as a fence against creatures. It was the shape of order itself. Outside, it was not just another location. Outside, it was the possibility that reality could return to a state before creation was complete. That is why the battle against chaos in Mesopotamian tradition is not only physical combat, it is cosmic maintenance. The gods must establish roles. They must assign places. They must secure destinies. They must keep waters within limits. They must keep the dead below, the gods above, the humans in the middle, the sea at the margins, the monsters where they belong. What happens when one of those limits breaks? The answer is disaster. A monster crosses into mythic history when a boundary fails. The flood crosses into civilization when waters ignore their banks. A demon crosses into the body when protection fails. A foreign army crosses the city wall when defense fails. A god's anger crosses into human life when ritual fails. The same pattern repeats at different scales. The ancient world was not afraid of evil in a simple moral sense. It was afraid of invasion by disorder. This is why monsters could be both terrifying and useful. Their images could also protect. A frightening hybrid carved or placed at a gate might repel other harmful forces. In a world where danger was imagined as supernatural and boundary-breaking, the defender needed to look like it understood the same borderland. The guardian borrowed the language of chaos to protect order from chaos. That paradox is deeply Mesopotamian. The boundary is protected by beings that resemble what they oppose. The city is guarded by animal strength. The temple is protected by supernatural forms. The ordered world uses controlled terror to repel uncontrolled terror. And hidden inside this logic is a profound psychological truth. Human beings often defend themselves by naming their fears. Once fear has a body, it can be placed at the gate. Once chaos has a symbol, rituals can be performed against it. Once the unknown becomes a monster, it is no longer completely formless. But the oldest terror remains. What if the monsters were never meant to be literal animals waiting outside the world? What if they were memories of everything the world had to exclude in order for human life to begin? In that case, the wall around Earth was not built against one species, one race of beings, or one secret enemy. It was built against the collapse of distinction itself, against the return of the unmeasured, against the ancient sea without borders, against the divine violence before law, against the night before names. The monsters outside order were frightening because they reminded humanity of a possibility too large to face. Directly creation might not be permanent, and if the wall existed to hold back chaos, what power could possibly be strong enough to build it? Who builds a boundary around the world? In ancient Mesopotamian thought, walls did not appear by accident. Canals did not dig themselves. Fields did not measure themselves. Temples did not rise from the mud without planning, labor, ritual, and authority. Order was something made. More than that, order was something assigned. This is one of the clearest ways to understand the gods of Sumer. They were not only beings who lived above humans and received offerings. They were powers who organized existence. They gave cities their identities. They gave kingship its sacred weight. They fixed destinies. They controlled waters, storms, fertility, writing, wisdom, war, justice, and death. The world functioned because divine powers held its pieces in place. So if the human world was enclosed by cosmic limits, the builders of those limits were not imagined as human engineers. They were gods, but not gods in the soft modern sense of distant symbols or private beliefs. To the Sumerians, divine power was woven into reality. A city without its god was not merely politically weakened, it was spiritually exposed. A temple without offerings was not merely neglected, it was a break in the relationship between heaven and earth. A king without divine favor was not merely unlucky. His rule could become illegitimate. The gods did not simply decorate the universe, they structured it. This makes creation stories especially important. In Mesopotamian tradition, creation often begins with separation. Heaven and earth are distinguished, waters are divided, divine roles are established, lands, cities, and human responsibilities are placed into an ordered pattern. The act of creation is not always described as producing matter from nothing. It is often described as arranging what exists into a meaningful system. Creation is architecture, and the first architecture is boundary. Think of the ancient builder standing in a city of mud brick. Before a wall can rise, someone must decide where the line belongs. The line is traced. The foundation is prepared. Bricks are shaped, dried, carried, stacked, and sealed. The wall does not only protect the city, it defines the city. Inside the wall is the named place. Outside the wall is everything else. The gods perform this same act on a cosmic scale. They define where heaven belongs. They define where earth belongs. They define where the waters may flow. They define where the dead must go. They define the stations of celestial bodies. They define the authority of temples and cities. In the Sumerian imagination, to make a world is to say, this belongs here, that belongs there, and the two must not be confused. What if the wall around Earth was really the first law, not a law written by a king on a stele, not a law argued in a court, a deeper law, the law that separates above from below, life from death, divine from human, fresh water from salt water, city from wilderness, order from chaos? The god Enlil is especially important in this kind of thinking. In Sumerian religion, Enlil was one of the great powers associated with authority, command, wind, and kingship. His city, Nippur, became a major religious center. Myths and hymns often present him as a figure whose decisions carry immense cosmic force. When Enlil decrees, the world is not merely advised, it is arranged. That idea is difficult for modern people to feel fully. Today, many people imagine law as something humans invent and change. Ancient Mesopotamians also understood human law, contracts, disputes, and royal decrees. But beneath human law stood divine order. A decree from the gods was not a suggestion. It was part of the structure of existence. This is why the ancient concept of destiny matters. Destiny, in Mesopotamian thought, was not simply personal fate. It could mean the assigned nature, role, or function of a being, object, city, or cosmic power. To fix a destiny was to establish how something belongs within the world. Without destiny, things are unstable. With destiny, things have place. A wall is destiny made visible. It tells a city where it begins and ends. A cosmic boundary tells reality where it begins and ends. This is why theft or disruption of divine authority is so terrifying in myth. If the power to determine destinies is seized, then the architecture of reality trembles. The issue is not simply who holds a magical object or who wins a divine contest. The issue is whether the world remains arranged. The Sumerian gods were not always peaceful figures maintaining a perfect universe. Their myths show conflict, desire, anger, rivalry, mistakes, and terrifying decisions. Divine order was powerful, but not always comforting. The same gods who gave civilization could send destruction. The same divine system that made agriculture possible could allow famine. The same sacred order that supported kingship could crush ordinary people beneath labor, taxation, and war. This creates a deeper tension. If the gods built the boundaries, did they build them for humanity's protection, or for the gods' own order? Ancient texts do not always answer this directly. In some myths, humans are created to serve the gods, to provide offerings, labor, and ritual maintenance. This does not mean every text presents human life as meaningless. It means the relationship between gods and humans was hierarchical. Humans depended on gods, but gods also received service from humans. The cosmos was not a democracy. It was a sacred economy of power, duty, and exchange. So a boundary around the human world might not have been imagined only as a shelter. It may also have been a controlled enclosure where humans fulfilled their role. That thought is unsettling. A protected zone can also be a managed zone. The city wall keeps enemies out, but it also keeps citizens inside a system of authority. The temple gate protects the shrine, but it also controls who approaches the god. The cosmic boundary protects order, but it also defines what humans are allowed to know, where they are allowed to go, and how far they may rise. Could humanity's place in the Sumerian cosmos have been both sacred and restricted? The evidence of myth points in that direction. Humans are important because they participate in divine order. They build temples, make offerings, maintain cities, bury the dead, preserve names, and serve the gods. But they are not equal to the gods. They do not freely enter heaven. They do not escape death. They do not command destiny. Their knowledge is partial. Their lives are brief. Their world is bounded. This bounded condition may be the emotional core of the entire mystery. Ancient people were not only asking what lies outside the wall, they were asking who placed humanity inside it, and why. The divine builders of boundaries were not merely protecting humans from chaos. They were defining the terms of human existence. They gave humans a world with rivers, stars, grain, temples, language, law, and memory. But they also gave humans limits, death, ignorance, dependence, vulnerability, and separation from the highest realms. The wall, then, becomes a sacred contract written into creation itself. Inside it, life can exist. Outside it, chaos waits. Above it, God's rule. Below it, death receives. Across it, only permitted powers may pass. That is a majestic vision, but not a comforting one. It means the human world survives because immense forces agree to keep it intact. It means reality is not guaranteed by human strength. It means every harvest, every dawn, every royal reign, every birth, every safe night behind a city wall depends on boundaries older than any human memory. And if the gods built those boundaries to hold reality in place, what happened in the ancient stories when the boundaries began to break? What does it mean when the wall fails? For ancient Mesopotamians, the answer was not theoretical. They knew what failure looked like. A canal bank breaks. A field disappears. A city gate burns. A king loses divine favor. A temple is looted. A corpse is left unburied. A storm rolls across the plain and turns streets into rivers of mud. In a world built on controlled boundaries, disaster was often imagined as a crossing that should never have happened. No story captures that terror more powerfully than the flood. The Mesopotamian flood tradition appears in several forms across time, including Sumerian material and later Akkadian compositions, such as the Atrahasis epic and the flood episode in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The details are not identical in every version, and historians treat these texts as mythic traditions shaped by scribal culture, theology, and memory. But their emotional center is unmistakable. A destructive flood comes upon humanity, and survival depends on warning, obedience, construction, and preservation. The flood is not simply rain. It is the world's structure coming undone. In ordinary life, water has a place. It belongs in canals, rivers, wells, marshes, jars, ritual basins, and fields at the proper season. It can be lifted, poured, measured, channeled, stored, and invoked in purification. In the flood story, water refuses place. It rises beyond banks. It crosses walls. It enters homes, temples, animal pens, roads, and royal spaces. It erases the difference between city and river, house and marsh, field and sea. That is why flood myths carry such force. They do not describe only drowning. They describe the collapse of categories. Land becomes water, order becomes noise. Human voices vanish beneath storm. The city, which once stood as a symbol of divine and human organization, becomes helpless. Imagine a Sumerian city in the hours before catastrophe. The canals are already too full. The sky is dark in a way that feels unnatural. Animals panic. Families climb roofs. Priests call out to gods whose statues sit inside temples built to anchor heaven to earth. The city wall, so meaningful against human enemies, is useless against water that rises from every side. The thing outside has found every entrance. What kind of wall can stop the sea when the gods allow it through? This is where the flood memory becomes central to the mystery of a boundary around Earth. If the cosmic boundary is what keeps chaos away, then the flood is the nightmare of that boundary opening. It is not only an environmental disaster. In mythic language, it is a reversal of creation. Creation separates water and land. Flood reunites them. Creation assigns places. Flood abolishes them. Creation allows humans to build. Flood reduces human work to floating debris. The terrifying message is clear: the ordered world is not permanent by itself. In the Sumerian flood story, the figure often identified as Ziusudra receives warning and survives. In later Akkadian traditions, similar roles are played by Atrahasis and Utnapishtim. These names belong to different versions, and they should not be treated as one unchanged character. But the pattern is striking. One human receives knowledge that others do not. One human prepares a vessel. One human passes through destruction and carries life across the waters. The vessel becomes a temporary world. A boat is a wall that floats. Inside it are life, memory, breath, and continuity. Outside it are waters that have swallowed the known order. For a time, the entire future of humanity is imagined as existing inside a constructed boundary surrounded by chaos. The city wall has failed. The cosmic order has ruptured. A smaller enclosure must preserve what remains. This image is astonishing. A sealed vessel on endless waters may be the most concentrated symbol of Mesopotamian boundary thinking. It contains the living against the outside. It separates survival from dissolution. It turns craftsmanship into salvation. It makes the builder a guardian of creation. But the flood also raises uncomfortable questions about the gods. In these traditions, The disaster is not usually portrayed as a purely natural accident. Divine decision plays a role. Human noise, overpopulation, divine irritation, or hidden counsels appear in later versions. One god may decide destruction. Another may preserve life through warning. The divine world itself appears divided. This creates a disturbing idea. The powers who build boundaries may also permit them to fail. For ancient listeners, that would not have been a small theological puzzle. It touched every part of life. If famine came, had a god withdrawn favor? If a city fell, had its divine protector abandoned it? If disease spread, had a boundary been breached? If floodwaters rose, was this weather, punishment, fate, or cosmic imbalance? The flood story does not offer a modern scientific explanation. It gives a mythic grammar for catastrophe. When the waters rise too high, reality has lost its proper lines. Modern archaeology shows that Mesopotamia did experience severe local floods at different times, and excavations at several ancient sites have revealed flood deposits. But scholars do not treat every flood layer as proof of a single universal deluge covering the whole earth. The relationship between real floods and mythic flood traditions is complex. Memory, theology, storytelling, and regional disaster may all have contributed. That complexity makes the myth more interesting, not less. A real flood can destroy a settlement. A remembered flood can become a warning about the universe. A mythic flood can become the moment when the wall between order and chaos breaks open. And what was kept out by the wall? In flood language, it was not an army of creatures. It was the ancient water that dissolves difference. It was the return of a pre-ordered state. It was the force that makes cities meaningless and reduces human achievement to silence. This is why flood stories survived. They spoke to a fear every generation understood. No matter how strong a king became, no matter how high a temple rose, no matter how carefully fields were measured, the world could still be overwhelmed. The human realm needed protection from forces older, larger, and less negotiable than human law. The flood also transforms the meaning of obedience and secrecy. Not everyone receives the warning. Not everyone knows what is coming. In some versions, the survivor's knowledge is indirect, hidden, or carefully delivered. The mystery is not only that destruction comes. The mystery is that survival depends on hearing a message from beyond ordinary human awareness. What if the boundary around Earth was never meant to be crossed by humans, but warnings could cross it? That question changes everything. A warning means the wall is not completely sealed. It means communication is possible. It means the divine realm may hide danger, but also mercy. It means the same boundary that keeps humanity limited can, in rare moments, allow saving knowledge to pass through. Yet the flood leaves a scar in the imagination. After the waters recede, the world is not simply restored. Something has been revealed. The safe order of daily life is shown to be fragile. The wall can fail. The gods can disagree. Water can return. Human civilization can vanish so completely that only memory, tablet, and myth remain. And if one flood could be remembered as the breaking of the world's boundary, what other hidden cracks did ancient people fear were waiting inside creation itself? Why did the first cities look like worlds inside walls? In Sumer, a city was never merely a crowded settlement. It was a sacred enclosure, a political body, an economic machine, a ritual landscape, and a statement against disorder. Mud brick walls rose from the plain not only to stop enemies, but to declare that something meaningful existed inside. The wall said, here is a named place. Here are gods, laws, fields, families, festivals, stores of grain, scribes, workers, and memory. Outside the wall, the land did not simply vanish. There were farms, canals, villages, roads, shepherds, travelers, and trade routes. But symbolically, the city represented a concentrated form of order. It was the place where human labor, divine presence, and royal authority were gathered into one visible shape. The city was a miniature cosmos. That idea opens a new path into the mystery of the wall around Earth. If Sumerians understood their cities as ordered spaces surrounded by danger, perhaps their cosmic imagination expanded the same pattern outward. Earth itself could be imagined like a sacred city organized within, threatened without, watched by divine authority, and dependent on boundaries. This does not mean every city wall was a religious metaphor. Walls were practical. They defended against raids, rival states, wild animals, and sudden violence. They marked power. They controlled movement. They helped define civic identity. But in ancient Mesopotamia, practical things were rarely only practical. A wall could be military, economic, political, and sacred at the same time. In the Sumerian world, cities belonged to gods. Uruk was associated with Inanna and Un. Nippur was associated with Enlil. Eridu was associated with Enki. Ur was associated with Nana, the moon god. Each city had its own divine center, its own rituals, its own prestige, and its own mythic memory. To live in a city was not only to live among people, it was to live within the territory of a god. The temple stood at the heart of this arrangement. Around the temple gathered storage rooms, workshops, administrative spaces, courtyards, offering systems, and personnel, food, animals, textiles, labor, and land could flow through temple institutions. Scribes recorded deliveries, obligations, and distributions. Priests maintained rituals. The divine household was imagined as real and active. The god was not treated as a distant idea, but as a presence whose earthly home required care. So the city wall enclosed more than bodies. It enclosed a relationship between humans and the divine. What if the cosmic wall worked the same way? What if Earth was imagined as a divine estate, a sacred territory where humans performed their assigned role while unseen powers maintained the larger structure? This possibility gives the city wall a powerful symbolic role. Inside the city, things are named and counted. Fields are assigned. Offerings are measured. Festivals follow calendars. Disputes can be judged. Labor is organized. Memory is written. The city turns time and space into order. Outside, things become less predictable. The desert does not follow the city's law. The steppe does not obey temple accounts. The enemy does not honor local boundaries. The storm does not ask permission. The wilderness cannot be fully measured. This contrast shaped the ancient imagination deeply. Civilization was not felt as the natural condition of the world. It was a fragile achievement, constantly rebuilt through labor and ritual. A Sumerian city wall, then, was not just a barrier against people. It was a line against collapse. Picture the city of Uruk in its ancient strength. Long walls stretch across the plain. Gates admit caravans, workers, animals, and officials. Inside, narrow streets twist between mud brick houses. The temple precinct rises above ordinary roofs. Storage jars line rooms. Reed baskets carry grain. Scribes press wedge-shaped signs into clay. Somewhere, a hymn is sung to a goddess whose power is believed to protect the city's life. From above, the city would appear like an island of design. That image matters. The city gathers chaos into pattern. Clay becomes brick. Brick becomes wall. Water becomes canal. Grain becomes ration. Sound becomes hymn. Speech becomes tablet. Death becomes burial. Time becomes festival. Everything is transformed by boundary. Without the wall, the city is exposed. Without the gate, the wall is useless. Without the temple, the city loses its sacred center. Without the god, the temple becomes empty architecture. Every layer depends on another layer. This is the architecture of ancient order. Modern historians often speak of urbanism, irrigation, state formation, labor specialization, and administrative control when explaining Sumerian civilization. These are essential. But the ancient people themselves did not see the city only as an economic development. They saw it through divine language. City building could be praised as a gift of the gods. Kings boasted of constructing walls, restoring temples, digging canals, and securing land under divine command. A king who built a wall was not only protecting citizens, he was imitating cosmic order. He was drawing a line against the unformed. He was making visible the invisible principle that reality survives through boundaries. This may help explain why walls appear so often in royal memory. To build or rebuild a wall was to show strength, legitimacy, and care for the god's city. The wall displayed the king's role as guardian of order. A broken wall could symbolize weakness. A restored wall could symbolize renewed favor. But walls also reveal anxiety. People do not build walls around what cannot be lost. A wall announces that danger is expected. It admits that the inside is vulnerable. It confesses fear while displaying confidence. The higher the wall, the more precious and threatened the center must be. Could the same be true of the ancient cosmic boundary? If the world needed enclosing, then the world was not invincible. If Earth needed divine limits, then creation was not self-protecting. If gods, gates, waters, mountains, and rituals all worked to maintain order, then disorder was always near enough to matter. The city as cosmic mirror shows us something profound about Sumerian thought. The universe was understandable because it resembled the city, and the city was sacred because it resembled the universe. Both had centers, both had boundaries, both had authorities, both required maintenance, both could be invaded, both could fall. This is not primitive thinking. It is an attempt to make human life meaningful inside danger. The Sumerians looked at their cities and saw the shape of survival. They looked at the cosmos and imagined the same structure on a scale beyond human control. The wall around Earth, in this sense, was not a hidden object. It was the enlarged shadow of the city wall, projected onto existence itself. And that raises a quiet but unsettling question. If every Sumerian city needed a sacred center to hold its world together, what stood at the center of Earth's larger enclosure? What kind of building tries to touch heaven without breaking it open? Across the ancient Mesopotamian plain, temples did not simply sit among houses. They rose above them. Their platforms lifted sacred space away from ordinary ground. Their stairways, terraces, walls, and courts created a visible ascent, a movement from the human world toward the divine. In a land where natural mountains were distant, people built sacred height from mud brick. The ziggurat became one of the most powerful symbols of Mesopotamian civilization. To modern eyes, a ziggurat may look like an ancient monument, a stepped tower, a ruin shaped by time. But to the people who built and maintained these structures, sacred height was not decoration. It expressed a relationship between realms. The temple was the god's house. The raised platform was a place set apart. The ascent was controlled. Not everyone could climb everywhere. Not every space was open to every body. The higher one moved, the more restricted the world became. This detail matters. The ziggurat was not a ladder for ordinary humanity to storm heaven. It was a managed point of contact. The ancient city needed connection with the gods, but that connection had to be ordered. Too little contact meant abandonment. Too much uncontrolled contact meant danger. A temple created a safe pattern for approach offering: prayer, purification, procession, hymn, incense, sacrifice, storage, priestly service, and ritual timing. The gods could be invited, honored, and housed, but not casually seized. A sacred building is a boundary with a doorway. That is why the temple that touched heaven does not weaken the mystery of a cosmic wall. It strengthens it. The very existence of such structures suggests that Mesopotamians imagined the divine world as near enough to communicate with, yet separate enough to require architecture, ritual, and permission. If heaven were completely unreachable, no temple would matter. If heaven were completely open, no temple would be necessary. The temple stands between these extremes. Picture a ziggurat at night. Its brick mass rises above the city. The streets below are dark, but the upper levels catch moonlight. Priests move through restricted spaces. The smell of offerings drifts through the air. Above, stars form silent patterns. Below, the city sleeps behind its walls. The structure seems to say that the universe has levels, and this is one of the few places where those levels may align. What if the sacred tower was a controlled opening in the boundary around the human world? Not a hole, not a breach, a sanctioned meeting place. The Sumerians had no single word that maps perfectly onto a modern scientific dimension or portal, and it would be misleading to force modern fantasy language onto ancient religion. But their texts and buildings show a real concern with contact between divine and human realms. Temples were not symbolic in the weak sense. They were active ritual centers where divine presence was served and maintained. The god's statue, in Mesopotamian practice, could be treated as a living presence after ritual activation. It could be clothed, fed, washed, honored, and carried in procession. This is difficult for modern people to understand if they separate matter and spirit too sharply. In the ancient temple, object, presence, ritual, and divine identity could overlap. The sacred did not need to be invisible to be real, so the temple became a place where boundaries softened without disappearing. That is a delicate condition. A boundary that disappears creates chaos. A boundary that never opens creates isolation. A sacred threshold allows exchange without collapse. This is exactly what city civilization needed. Humans needed rain, fertility, justice, protection, victory, healing, royal legitimacy, and cosmic stability. These blessings belonged to divine power. But divine power had to enter the human world in forms that could be received. Ritual made that possible. The ziggurat expressed this in brick. Its height suggested ascent. Its mass suggested stability. Its staged levels suggested ordered movement. Its placement near the temple precinct suggested sacred centrality. It turned theology into landscape. A person in the city did not need to read a tablet to understand that the god's house stood higher than ordinary life. The building itself taught the message. The center rises. The sacred is elevated. Access is limited. Heaven is near, but not common. This built form also connects to the ancient memory of mountains. In many Mesopotamian temple names, mountain language appears. Sacred buildings could be described in terms that evoke cosmic mountains, shining heights, or bonds between heaven and earth. A temple might be imagined as a meeting point where realms were joined properly. Again, the idea is not that people thought bricks physically pierced the sky. The deeper idea is that sacred architecture recreated cosmic order inside the city. The artificial mountain solved a problem of geography and theology. Sumer had few natural mountains, but it needed a mountain of the gods, so it built one. This may reveal why the boundary around Earth was not imagined as only defensive. Boundaries in Sumerian thought could also organize access. A wall with no gate is prison. A wall with sacred gates becomes a system of relationship. The temple was one of those gates, but carefully governed. And yet, sacred height carries a risk. Any attempt to approach heaven raises the question of human ambition. How high may humans build? How close may they come? What happens when a structure meant for service becomes a symbol of pride? Later traditions from the wider ancient Near East would explore this anxiety through stories of towers, languages, and divine limitation. These are not identical to Sumerian temple theology, but they show how powerful the image became. A human-built height can either honor heaven or challenge it. The ziggurat sits at the border of those meanings. It is devotion in brick. It is power in brick. It is longing in brick. It is also a reminder that the divine realm remains above. Even the tallest temple does not abolish the sky. Even the highest platform does not make humans gods. Even the most sacred staircase ends before the infinite. The building reaches upward, but the boundary remains. This is the quiet tragedy inside sacred architecture. It brings humans closer to mystery, but also reminds them that they cannot possess it. A priest may climb where others cannot. A king may restore the temple and claim divine favor. A city may gather around the god's house and believe itself protected. But heaven is still not human territory. The temple does not erase distance. It makes distance meaningful. That may be why these structures still move us. Ruined ziggurats, broken platforms, eroded stairways, and vanished temple courts seem to hold an unanswered prayer. They are not only evidence of ancient engineering. They are monuments to a civilization that believed the world survived through contact with what lay beyond it. The temple that touched heaven was not built to conquer the cosmic wall. It was built to approach it correctly. It taught that the universe had levels. That passage required permission, that divine presence was powerful, and that humans could live safely only when the boundary between realms was honored. But the most disturbing possibility remains hidden inside the bricks. If temples were controlled openings between worlds, what could happen when a god descended through one in anger? What if death had architecture? Not a vague darkness, not a shapeless emptiness, not a silent nothing beyond the last breath. In Sumerian imagination, the realm of the dead had structure. It had rules. It had entrances. It had powers who received those who crossed from life into the shadowed country below. One of the most haunting stories from Mesopotamian tradition is the descent of Inanna, the great goddess associated with love, sexuality, power, conflict, and royal authority. In the Sumerian version, Inanna chooses to descend to the underworld, the domain of her sister Ereshkigal. The reason for her descent has been debated by scholars, and the text carries layers of ritual, mythic, and theological meaning. But the journey itself is unforgettable. Inanna does not simply fall into darkness. She passes through gates. At each gate, something is removed from her: crown, jewelry, clothing, symbols of power, pieces of identity. The goddess who enters the underworld is slowly stripped of the signs that made her magnificent in the upper world. By the time she reaches the throne of Ereshkigal, she is no longer the radiant figure who began the journey. She has crossed a boundary where authority from above no longer protects her in the same way. This is one of the clearest ancient images of a guarded passage between realms. The underworld is not chaos in the sense of being lawless. It has law. That may be the most frightening part. The dead do not live in freedom outside all order. They enter a different order, one ruled by powers that do not care about the privileges of the living. Even a goddess must obey the gates. What does that reveal about the wall around the human world? It suggests that the boundary between life and death was not imagined as a simple line. It was a process, a series of thresholds, a ritualized dismantling of earthly identity. To cross into the lower realm was not only to move from one place to another, it was to be changed by the laws of that place. Each gate asks the same silent question: what can you keep when you leave the world of the living? For Inanna, the answer is almost nothing. This story would have resonated deeply in a culture where clothing, jewelry, crowns, seals, weapons, and ritual objects marked status. Ancient Mesopotamian society was intensely aware of rank and role. Kings, priests, officials, laborers, slaves, craftsmen, merchants, and scribes existed within visible systems of authority. What a person wore, carried, owned, or controlled mattered. But the underworld reverses the confidence of status. At the gates below, power is removed piece by piece. The image is psychologically devastating. Death strips identity. The body loses ornament. The voice falls silent. The name depends on others for memory. Wealth stays behind. Authority cannot command the grave. Beauty cannot negotiate with dust. Why would the Sumerians tell a story in which even Inanna is reduced? Perhaps because they understood death as the one boundary no rank could finally defeat. Inanna's descent also shows that the underworld is protected not merely from the living, but from uncontrolled divine intrusion. Ereshkigal's realm has sovereignty. It is not a basement of heaven. It is not a forgotten corner of creation. It has its own queen, its own procedures, its own terrifying dignity. This matters because modern readers often imagine ancient underworlds as places beneath the real story. But in Mesopotamian thought, the realm below was central to the structure of existence. Life above required death below. The living world could not make sense without a destination for the dead. The boundary was not accidental. It was part of cosmic order. The 7 gates are especially important. The number 7 appears frequently in Mesopotamian symbolic and ritual contexts, often associated with completeness, groups of divine powers, destructive forces, or structured sequences. It would be too simple to claim that every use of 7 means the same thing. But in the descent story, the repeated gates create a rhythm of total passage. Inanna is not partly transformed. She is completely brought under the laws of the lower realm. The descent is measured, gate by gate, loss by loss, silence by silence. A journey through 7 gates is not a casual entry. It is an initiation into finality. And yet, the story does not end with simple disappearance. Inanna is eventually restored through a complex sequence involving divine assistance, substitutes, and the harsh logic of the underworld. The details vary across related traditions, but the central pattern remains: one cannot leave the realm of death without consequence. Someone must take a place. Balance must be kept. The underworld releases nothing for free. This is another form of boundary law. Passage between realms requires exchange. The lower world cannot simply be robbed. Life cannot reclaim what death has taken without payment. In mythic terms, this protects cosmic balance. In emotional terms, it expresses a truth humans still feel: every return from grief carries a cost. The gates of the underworld are therefore not only barriers, they are accounting points. They count what is lost. They enforce transformation. They preserve the authority of the dead. This may help explain why burial rites mattered so strongly. A person did not merely stop living. They entered a relationship with the lower realm. Proper burial, offerings, and remembrance helped maintain order between the dead and the living. Neglect could create unrest. The boundary needed ritual care. A grave, then, is not only an ending, it is a gate built into the earth. Every burial repeats the cosmic architecture in miniature. The body passes below. The living remain above. Offerings cross symbolically. Memory travels where flesh cannot. The household maintains a relationship with what it must not fully invite back. Inanna's 7 gates make visible what every grave implies. There is a threshold beneath the world, and it has rules. This gives a new answer to what the wall was built to keep out. It was not only chaos from the outer sea or divine fire from above. It was also the unregulated return of death. The wall between living and dead kept the world from becoming haunted beyond endurance. It allowed grief to become ritual instead of invasion. It allowed memory without collapse. But Inanna's story also reveals something unsettling: the boundary can be crossed. Rarely, dangerously, at terrible cost, a goddess can descend. Messengers can be sent. Substitutes can be demanded. The lower realm can reach upward through loss, mourning, sickness, dream, and ghostly disturbance. The gates are closed, but not meaningless. They are active points of exchange between worlds that must remain separate. That is why the descent story still feels powerful. It turns death into a journey, power into vulnerability, identity into clothing removed at a gate, and the underworld into a kingdom with its own throne. The wall around Earth, in this vision, is not one wall. It is a layered system of cosmic separations. The upper boundary keeps mortals from the divine heights. The outer boundary keeps the ordered world from chaos. The lower boundary keeps the dead from consuming the living. And every boundary has its own gatekeepers, laws, and price. But the 7 gates leave one final question hanging in the darkness. If even a goddess could be stripped of power below the earth, what hope did ordinary humans believe they had when their own names were called to descend? What if the most dangerous part of the ancient record is not what it says, but what is missing? The surviving tablets from Sumer and the wider Mesopotamian world do not speak with one perfect voice. They are broken, scattered, copied, translated, reinterpreted, and preserved by accident as much as intention. Some tablets were baked hard by fire. Some were buried in ruins. Some survived as school exercises. Some are known only through later copies. Some exist in fragments so small that a single missing line can change the entire feeling of a passage. This is where the mystery becomes more difficult. Modern people often want ancient texts to behave like complete books. They want one source, one author, one doctrine, one clean answer. But Sumerian records do not come to us that way. They come like voices from a ruined archive, each tablet carrying a piece of a world that no longer exists in living memory. A hymn may preserve theology. A myth may preserve ritual imagination. An administrative tablet may preserve daily economics. A royal inscription may preserve political propaganda. A lexical list may preserve scribal training. A broken mythological fragment may preserve a sentence that once belonged to a much larger story, and between them are gaps. Those gaps are where modern imagination becomes most dangerous. When someone claims that Sumerian records reveal a literal wall around Earth, the first responsible question is not whether the idea sounds exciting. The question is which text, which line, which language, which period, which translation, and which scholarly context. Without that, mystery becomes invention. This does not make the ancient material less fascinating. It makes it more powerful, because the real evidence is strange enough without forcing it into modern fantasies. The Sumerians and their successors did imagine a structured cosmos. They did speak of heaven and earth, the underworld, deep waters, divine decrees, distant mountains, gates, guardians, and boundaries. But these ideas are preserved across different genres and periods, not as a single technical blueprint. A myth is not a map. A map is not a hymn. A ritual text is not a newspaper report. A royal inscription is not neutral history. Each type of record must be handled differently. This is one reason archaeologists and historians move carefully. They are not trying to drain mystery from the past. They are trying to keep the past from being replaced by our own desires. The ancient world deserves more respect than being turned into a mirror for every modern theory. But the fragments themselves create a haunting problem. What if the missing portions contained details we will never recover? A clay tablet can break at the exact moment a god speaks. A line naming a place can disappear. A phrase describing a boundary can be lost. A story can survive in a later version but vanish in its earlier form. A scribe can copy a myth centuries after its first telling, changing emphasis, theology, language, or political meaning. The ancient record is not a sealed chest. It is a shattered floor. Every piece matters, but no piece gives the whole room back. Imagine an excavation site in southern Iraq. Dust rises in the heat. A worker uncovers a fragment of clay no larger than a hand. On it are wedge-shaped signs pressed thousands of years ago by a reed stylus. The tablet may contain a school exercise, a list of offerings, a legal dispute, or a few lines of a myth about gods and the world. To an untrained eye, it looks silent. To a specialist, it may open a doorway. But even specialists often face uncertainty. A sign may be damaged. A word may have several meanings. A divine name may be restored from context, but not absolutely certain. A phrase may appear in a damaged sentence. A translation may include brackets, question marks, or cautious alternatives. The more broken the tablet, the more fragile the interpretation. This is why confidence can be suspicious. The loudest claims about ancient mysteries are often built where the evidence is thinnest. A careful historian may say, "This passage seems to suggest." A sensational interpreter says, "This proves." A careful archaeologist may say, "The text is fragmentary." A sensational interpreter says, "They hid the truth." A careful translator may say, "The word can mean several things." A sensational interpreter chooses the meaning that creates the most dramatic story. Why does this happen? Because broken records invite completion. The human mind hates gaps. When a story is missing pieces, we instinctively fill them. We connect symbols. We form patterns. We search for hidden causes. This is not foolish. It is one of the ways human intelligence works. But it can also lead us away from evidence and into projection. The ancient scribes created mysteries by what they wrote. Time created deeper mysteries by what it erased. This matters profoundly for the idea of a wall around Earth. Ancient Mesopotamian texts certainly describe boundaries, but the word wall can mislead when pulled out of context. A city wall is literal. A cosmic boundary may be theological. A surrounding sea may be geographic and mythic. A mountain range may be a horizon image. A gate may be ritual, underworld, temple, or narrative architecture. A guardian may be protective symbolism, not evidence of a physical structure in space. The same image can operate on several levels at once. That is the beauty of ancient thought. It is also the danger of interpreting it too quickly. Sumerian culture did not separate the practical, sacred, political, and cosmic as sharply as modern people often do. A wall could defend a city and express divine order. A temple could be architecture and a meeting point with heaven. A river could be water and a divine force. A tablet could be a record and a ritual object of memory. The ancient world was layered. So when records speak of boundaries, the question is not simply, was it real or symbolic? The better question is, real in what way? Real as belief, real as ritual, real as cosmic imagination, real as political metaphor, real as geography remembered through myth, real as a poetic description of the horizon, sea, or sky. Ancient people did not always draw the line where modern people do. This is why the missing tablets matter so much. Somewhere in the gaps between fragments may have been explanations, variations, local traditions, temple teachings, or mythic details that would change how the surviving lines are understood. We are not reading the whole library. We are reading what escaped destruction. And yet, even damaged records preserve a pattern too strong to ignore. The world is ordered. Order is bounded. Boundaries are guarded. Crossing is dangerous. Chaos waits at the margins. Death has gates. Heaven is remote. Water is older than cities. Gods assign places. Humans live inside limits they did not choose. That pattern does not prove a literal wall around the planet. It reveals something more ancient and more psychologically powerful. Mesopotamians imagined reality as structured by protected separations. The human world was safe only when those separations held. But the tablets refused to give final certainty. They let us approach the boundary, then stop us with broken lines. They show the gate, but not always what stands behind it. They preserve the question, but not always the answer. And perhaps that is why the mystery survives so intensely. A complete explanation might have become doctrine. A broken record becomes an invitation. Every missing sign becomes a shadow. Every lost tablet becomes a sealed door. So the fragments leave us suspended between evidence and silence. And if the surviving tablets are only pieces of a much larger cosmic vision, what image of Earth did the ancient scribes once know that time has taken away? What if one ancient tablet actually tried to draw the world, not through a modern satellite view, not through mathematical geography, not with continents, latitudes, oceans, and planetary curvature, but through a small clay image of the inhabited Earth, surrounded by waters, distant regions, and written explanations that seem to turn the world itself into a sacred diagram? This object is often called the Babylonian map of the world. It is not Sumerian in the strict early sense. It comes from a later Babylonian context, written in Akkadian, and scholars usually date it to the first millennium BCE. That means it belongs to a Mesopotamian tradition that had developed long after the earliest Sumerian cities rose from the southern plain. But it is still one of the most important surviving clues for how Mesopotamian scribes could imagine the shape of the world. Because here, at last, the boundary becomes visible. The tablet shows a circular world. Inside the circle are places, including Babylon, rivers, regions, and named lands. Around the circle is a ring labeled as bitter water, often understood as a surrounding ocean. Beyond that ring are triangular or wedge-shaped regions that seem to represent distant outer lands or mysterious zones beyond the known world. The image is small. The idea is enormous. A circle of land, a ring of water, strange regions outside. For anyone searching for the ancient idea of a wall around Earth, this tablet is irresistible. It seems to offer the shape of enclosure itself. The human world appears contained, surrounded, bordered. The outer water functions almost like a liquid wall, separating the known lands from whatever lies beyond. But the map must be treated carefully. It is not a modern map. It is not a photograph of the planet. It is not a technical atlas. It is a scribal cosmological image, combining geography, tradition, mythology, and cultural centrality. Babylon appears in a privileged position, not because the tablet is trying to be globally objective in a modern sense, but because Babylon mattered deeply to the worldview behind the drawing. Ancient maps often place meaning at the center. That is one of the great differences between ancient cartography and modern cartography. A modern map asks, where is it in measurable space? An ancient sacred map may also ask, what matters most? Where does order begin? What belongs to the civilized center? Where does danger start? How is the world arranged under divine authority? The Babylonian map answers with a circle. The circle is one of the most powerful shapes humans have ever used. It encloses, it completes, it separates inside from outside, it creates a center, it makes the world feel held. A circle drawn around land does not merely describe geography. It creates a mental boundary. Inside is the known. Outside is the strange. Between them is bitter water. That phrase alone carries mystery. Bitter water suggests salt water, the sea, the dangerous surrounding expanse. For the people of Mesopotamia, salt water was not just another substance. It stood in contrast to the fresh waters that nourished fields and cities. Fresh water could be drawn into canals, wells, and irrigation systems. Salt water marked a harsher realm, unsuitable for drinking, difficult to cultivate, vast, and unpredictable. Fresh water belongs to life under control. Bitter water belongs to the edge. The map's outer regions are even more haunting. The triangular areas beyond the encircling water have been interpreted as distant lands, perhaps mythical or semi-mythical regions at the edge of the world. The accompanying text is damaged, which creates uncertainty. Some descriptions refer to strange places or conditions. The full meaning remains debated, and no responsible interpretation should pretend that every detail is settled. But the structure is unmistakable. The world humans know is not everything. Beyond the ring are other zones. Not empty nothing. Zones. This is where the ancient imagination becomes most unsettling. The boundary is not presented as the end of reality. It is the limit of ordered knowledge. Beyond it are places that can be named, imagined, feared, or described only in fragments. The map does not say, there is nothing outside. It says, there is an outside, but it is not the same as here. That is far more mysterious. A wall with nothing beyond it is simple. A wall with unknown lands beyond it creates obsession. The Babylonian map also reveals something about cultural perspective. Babylon sits near the center, and this reflects a worldview in which the great city is not just one place among many. It is a symbolic center of order. This fits the wider Mesopotamian habit of seeing sacred cities as anchors of cosmic meaning. The map is geography shaped by theology and imperial memory. Modern viewers may ask, did they really think the world was a flat disk surrounded by water? The answer is complicated. Many ancient Mesopotamian descriptions do seem to imagine the inhabited world in terms of a flat land surface beneath heaven and above the underworld, surrounded or bordered by cosmic waters. But ancient cultures did not always maintain one uniform cosmological model across all texts, regions, and centuries. Practical geography, mythic geography, astronomical observation, and ritual symbolism could coexist. A merchant knew roads and trade routes. A scribe knew lists of lands. An astronomer watched celestial cycles. A myth-teller described the world's edges. These forms of knowledge did not always need to merge into a single modern system. That is why the Babylonian map should not be treated as ignorance. It is not a failed satellite image. It is a successful sacred diagram. It shows how the world mattered, not merely where things were. It organizes reality around a center, a boundary, and an outside. For the mystery of the wall, the map provides a visual language. The circle is the enclosure. The bitter water is the barrier. The outer triangles are the beyond. The damaged text is the silence. Together, they create one of the strongest surviving images of a Mesopotamian world with limits. Yet those limits are not made of brick. They are made of water, distance, danger, and meaning. The boundary does not say that humans are trapped beneath a dome in the modern conspiracy sense. It says that the inhabited world is a sacred island in a larger and stranger reality. That idea is older than the map itself. It echoes the same ancient pattern found in myths of creation, flood, underworld journeys, temple architecture, and guarded thresholds. But here, the pattern takes form in a drawing. A scribe pressed lines into clay and gave the world an edge. Imagine that act. A reed stylus moves across wet clay. A circle appears. Rivers are marked. Cities are named. The bitter water is placed around the world. Strange regions are set beyond the ring. The tablet dries. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. The map breaks. Dirt covers it. Languages die. Then modern eyes find it again and ask what the ancient hand was trying to preserve. Was it a map of land? A map of belief? A map of fear? A map of the limits of human knowledge? Perhaps it was all of these. The Babylonian map of the world does not prove that Sumerians described a literal wall built around Earth. But it does reveal that Mesopotamian scribes could imagine the inhabited world as encircled and bordered, with a mysterious beyond outside the waters. It gives visible form to a very old question: what happens where the known world ends? And once that question is drawn in clay, it becomes difficult to ignore, because the tablet does not show humanity standing proudly in infinite space. It shows civilization inside a circle. It shows the known world held within a boundary. It shows an outside that is not fully explained. And if the ancient map placed strange regions beyond the bitter waters, what did the scribes believe lived there? What was the boundary meant to keep out? That question sounds simple until the ancient evidence begins to answer in many voices at once. It was not one enemy. It was not one creature. It was not one secret race waiting beyond the horizon. Mesopotamian thought imagined danger as layered, just as it imagined the cosmos as layered. Threat could come from water, wilderness, death, demons, divine anger, foreign lands, broken ritual, failed kingship, or the return of chaos itself. The wall around Earth, understood through ancient symbolism, was not a fence against a single invader. It was protection against everything that made order dissolve. This is why the ancient boundary is more interesting than the modern fantasy often attached to it. A literal wall in space would be strange, but simple. Ancient Mesopotamian boundaries were stranger because they worked at every level of life. They guarded the city from enemies, the temple from impurity, the body from illness, the household from ghosts, the fields from flood, the living from the dead, and the world from powers that belonged outside its proper order. To understand what was kept out, begin with the wilderness. The wilderness was not empty. It was the space beyond cultivation, beyond irrigation, beyond the regular rhythm of city life. It could hold animals, bandits, nomads, spirits, hunger, thirst, and divine uncertainty. The Mesopotamian city depended on fields, canals, labor, and administration. The wilderness did not submit to those systems. It represented life beyond measurement. This does not mean ancient Mesopotamians simply hated the wilderness. Shepherds moved through open landscapes. Trade routes crossed deserts and mountains. Foreign goods were valuable. Distant lands supplied materials Sumer lacked. The outside was necessary, but necessity did not remove fear. The outside brought timber, stone, metals, and contact. It also brought invasion, disease, strange customs, and unpredictable powers. The wall had to allow exchange without surrendering control. This is one of the oldest human dilemmas a society must open itself to survive. Yet every opening creates risk. The second danger was floodwater. Water belonged inside channels, rivers, wells, and ritual uses. Once it exceeded its place, it became a force of erasure. It could make a city look like it had never existed. Mud brick architecture, so practical in the alluvial plain, was also vulnerable to overwhelming water. A world made of clay knew what dissolution meant. Floodwater was the enemy of form. It washed away lines. It collapsed walls. It blurred field boundaries. It turned roads into currents. It made the built world return to mud. In mythic imagination, this was not only a natural disaster, it was a sign that the separation between land and water had failed. The third danger was the dead. The dead were not hated, but they were dangerous if not properly placed. They required burial, memory, offerings, and ritual attention. The living needed the dead to remain connected as ancestors, but not to cross back as restless forces. A forgotten dead person could become a disturbance. A neglected ghost could become a sign that the boundary between realms had weakened. Death had to be contained because grief itself can flood the living world. Every culture creates rituals to keep death from becoming formless. The Sumerians and their Mesopotamian successors did this through burial practices, offerings, lamentations, names, and underworld myths. The grave gave death a place. Ritual gave sorrow a shape. Memory allowed connection without collapse. The fourth danger was demonic or harmful supernatural force. Ancient Mesopotamian texts from different periods describe many kinds of troubling beings, illnesses, curses, and invisible threats. Some demons were associated with wilderness, disease, childbirth danger, nightmares, or the edges of human vulnerability. Ritual specialists used incantations, amulets, figurines, purification rites, and divine names to defend against them. Here the boundary becomes intimate. The wall is not only around the city, it is around the body. A person's skin becomes a border. A doorway becomes a vulnerable point. A bed at night becomes a small island of danger. A newborn child, a pregnant woman, a sick person, or a grieving household might be understood as especially exposed. The ancient world was full of openings where harm could enter. What if the great cosmic wall was mirrored in every smaller act of protection? A charm at a doorway, a ritual washing, a burial offering, a city gate, a temple restriction, a prayer before sleep, All of them repeat the same ancient need: keep the destructive outside from entering the fragile inside. The fifth danger was divine anger. This may be the hardest for modern minds. The gods were not merely protectors against danger. They could become the danger. A god offended by neglect, disorder, broken vows, improper ritual, or mysterious displeasure could send suffering. The divine realm was necessary for life, but not safe in a simple emotional sense. Sacred power had to be approached correctly. This makes the wall more complex. It did not simply separate good humans from bad outsiders. It regulated contact with overwhelming powers, including the gods themselves. Blessing and destruction could come from beyond the human realm. The same sky that brought light could send storms. The same waters that nourished crops could flood cities. The same divine order that granted kingship could also remove it. The sixth danger was forgetting. This may seem less dramatic than monsters or flood, but for ancient Mesopotamia, forgetting was a real threat to order. Writing emerged partly from the need to record, count, assign, preserve, and remember. Names mattered. Offerings mattered. Boundaries of land mattered. Royal achievements mattered. Temple duties mattered. If memory failed, obligations failed with it. A tablet is a wall against disappearance. A written name resists the outer darkness of oblivion. A list keeps goods from vanishing into confusion. A myth keeps sacred order alive across generations. A lament preserves the voice of a destroyed city. A royal inscription tries to make a king's work survive time itself. The outside, then, was not only spatial, it was temporal. Beyond the wall was the future in which all things are forgotten. This gives the ancient records their deepest sadness. Every tablet is an attempt to hold something inside the circle of memory. Every broken line proves that the wall did not fully succeed. So what was kept out? Chaos. But chaos was not one thing. It wore many faces. It was water without banks, death without ritual, power without permission, wilderness without measure, divinity without mediation, illness without explanation, foreignness without translation, time without memory. The boundary around Earth was built against all of these, not because the Sumerians were foolish, but because they understood that human life is a small zone of pattern inside forces too large to master. Civilization is a temporary agreement between mud, water, labor, language, ritual, and trust. Break enough boundaries, and the world humans depend on begins to disappear. This is why the ancient image still speaks. People still fear the same collapse under new names. A city loses power. A river rises. A disease enters. A border fails. A memory is erased. A system breaks. A screen fills with warnings. A home becomes unsafe. The outside comes in. The Sumerian mystery is not that they imagined danger beyond the world. The mystery is that they recognized how thin the protected world really was. And if the wall was built to keep out chaos in all its forms, why did ancient stories keep sending heroes, gods, and kings toward the very places humanity was warned not to cross? Why do so many ancient cultures imagine the world as something enclosed? The question is unsettling because it suggests that Mesopotamia was not alone in seeing reality as a protected structure. Across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean, people described heavens, underworlds, world seas, cosmic mountains, divine gates, guarded thresholds, and dangerous outer regions. These traditions were not all the same. They came from different languages, landscapes, rituals, and histories. But certain patterns appear again and again. The world is ordered. The ordered world has limits. Beyond those limits lies danger, mystery, divinity, death, or chaos. This does not mean all ancient cultures copied one original story in a simple way. Human beings everywhere confront the same basic conditions: sky above, ground below, horizon around, death ahead, water beyond control, and darkness outside the firelight. Similar symbols can emerge because similar fears and experiences shape the human imagination. At the same time, cultures did interact. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, the Levant, Persia, and the Greek world were connected through trade, war, migration, diplomacy, scribal exchange, conquest, and translation. Ideas moved, changed clothing, and took new names. The cosmic boundary traveled well because it answered a universal anxiety. In ancient Egypt, the ordered world was surrounded by forces of disorder. The concept often translated as Ma'at represented truth, balance, order, and rightness. Against it stood chaos, threat, and unmaking. Egyptian temple rituals, royal ideology, and cosmic imagery all emphasized the maintenance of order. Each sunrise could be imagined as victory over darkness. Each night, the sun god journeyed through dangerous regions before returning. The world survived because cosmic order was renewed. Here, the boundary is not identical to the Mesopotamian model, but the emotional structure is familiar. The safe world does not continue automatically. It must be defended. The sun's nightly journey in Egyptian thought also creates a striking parallel to Mesopotamian concern with hidden roots beyond ordinary sight. The sun disappears, travels where humans cannot follow, confronts danger, then returns. The horizon is not empty. It is a passage into sacred geography. Why did ancient people find the vanished sun so mysterious? Because every evening seemed to prove that the visible world was not the whole world. In later Hebrew traditions, the cosmos is also described through images of separation waters above and below, earth established amid seas, heavens stretched out, gates of heaven, depths beneath, and boundaries placed upon chaotic waters. These texts developed in their own theological world and should not be reduced to Mesopotamian borrowing. Yet scholars have long discussed connections between biblical and Mesopotamian flood traditions, creation imagery, and ancient Near Eastern cosmology. The shared environment of ideas matters. The sea, in particular, often becomes more than water. It becomes the symbol of what must be restrained. In several ancient Near Eastern traditions, divine power establishes order by limiting waters or defeating sea-associated forces. The sea is vast, restless, and resistant to human control. It erases borders. It hides creatures. It swallows ships. It does not care for kings. To imagine creation as the limiting of waters is to imagine existence as a victory over boundlessness. In Greek tradition, the world also carries images of enclosure and edge. Oceanus could be imagined as a great encircling river around the world. The far west held the Hesperides, the setting sun, and lands touched by death and immortality. Heroes traveled to outer regions to seek impossible knowledge or divine objects. The underworld had rivers, judges, entrances, and guardians. Cerberus at the gate of Hades is not Mesopotamian, but the pattern is recognizable. Death has a boundary, and the boundary is watched. A guarded underworld appears again. A distant edge appears again. A journey beyond ordinary human space appears again. Why would heroes always go to the edge? Because the center belongs to daily life. The edge belongs to revelation. Ancient Iranian traditions also preserve powerful images of cosmic struggle between order and destructive forces, light and darkness, truth and the lie. The details differ greatly from Sumerian religion, especially in later Zoroastrian theology. But the concern with protecting a good creation from invading corruption echoes the same human fear. The world as humans know it is vulnerable to forces that should not rule it. This is where comparison becomes valuable, but also dangerous. It is tempting to say that every ancient boundary means the same thing. It does not. An Egyptian horizon, a Babylonian world ocean, a Hebrew firmament, a Greek encircling river, an Iranian cosmic struggle, and a Sumerian underworld gate are not interchangeable. Each belongs to its own ritual, language, and theology. But when placed beside one another, they reveal a broader ancient habit of thought. Reality was not imagined as neutral space. Reality was moral, sacred, layered, and defended. Modern people often imagine the universe as vast but indifferent. Ancient people often imagined it as ordered but contested. That difference changes everything. In a contested universe, every boundary is meaningful. The city wall, the temple gate, the grave, the horizon, the sea, the sky, all become parts of a larger drama. The drama is not simply geography, it is survival. The ancient world saw existence as something rescued from confusion. Humans lived inside an ordered zone made possible by gods, rituals, kings, ancestors, and memory. The outside was not merely unknown, it was the place where the rules might change, where the dead might speak, where monsters might appear, where divine beings might test travelers, where waters might return, where language and law might fail. That pattern appears because it speaks to a deep structure in human consciousness. Every human being grows up inside boundaries. The body has skin. The house has a doorway. The family has rules. The village has edges. The city has walls. The night has darkness beyond the lamp. The dead are separated by burial. The sacred is separated by ritual. The mind itself separates known from unknown. Perhaps ancient cosmology expanded the human body into the universe. Skin became wall. Breath became wind. Blood became river. Memory became tablet. Death became underworld. Fear became monster. Hope became temple. The boundary around Earth, seen through this wider lens, is not an isolated Sumerian oddity. It is part of humanity's oldest symbolic language. People everywhere have asked where order ends and what waits beyond it. Different cultures answered with different images, but the question remained hauntingly similar. What protects the world? What threatens it? Who guards the crossing? What happens when the line breaks? And why do humans keep trying to look past it? The echoes across ancient traditions do not prove one hidden global doctrine. They reveal something more profound. Early civilizations repeatedly imagined existence as a fragile enclosure surrounded by powers beyond ordinary control. Mesopotamia gave this imagination some of its earliest written forms, but the feeling is much larger than any one culture. It is the feeling of standing at a shore, a mountain pass, a grave, a temple gate, or beneath a sky full of stars and sensing that reality has an inside and an outside. And if so many civilizations imagined a protected world, were they preserving shared memories of ancient landscapes or expressing the same fear written into the human mind? What if the cosmic wall began as a real landscape, not a supernatural barrier, not a hidden construction, not a literal ring built around the planet, but mountains, seas, deserts, marshes, and horizons transformed by memory into sacred boundaries. Ancient people did not imagine the world from nowhere. They imagined it from the ground beneath their feet. The Sumerian cosmos was shaped by what the Sumerians saw, feared, needed, and could not control. Their land was flat, fertile, exposed, and unstable. Their cities rose from river mud. Their fields depended on irrigation. Their trade reached toward places that looked dramatically different from the southern plain, so the edges of their world were not abstract. They were visible in the materials that entered their cities. Stone came from elsewhere. Timber came from elsewhere. Metals came from elsewhere. Precious goods came from beyond the familiar lowlands. Every imported object was a reminder that the city stood inside a larger and stranger world. A cedar beam carried the memory of mountains. A block of stone carried the weight of distant terrain. A copper tool carried the story of mines, trade routes, and foreign hands. The outside was present inside the city. That is a fascinating contradiction. The wall defined the city, but the city depended on what lay beyond the wall. Sacred buildings, royal monuments, tools, ornaments, weapons, and luxury goods often required materials not naturally abundant in Sumer. Civilization depended on controlled contact with the outer regions it feared. Could this have shaped mythic geography? Very likely. When a culture repeatedly receives vital materials from distant mountains, those mountains become more than geographic sources. They become symbolic reservoirs of power. When a culture depends on rivers that can nourish or destroy, water becomes more than water. When the southern horizon opens into marsh and sea, the sea becomes more than a direction. When deserts surround travel routes with thirst and danger, the desert becomes more than empty land. Landscape becomes theology when survival depends on it. This does not mean myth is just disguised geography. That would make the ancient imagination too small. A mountain in myth can be a real mountain, a divine threshold, a political frontier, and a psychological symbol at the same time. The ancient mind did not need to choose only one level. The physical world and sacred meaning could interpenetrate. Take mountains. For a lowland civilization, mountains feel like walls made by nature. They rise at the edge of sight. They block movement. They hold storms. They contain minerals. They host unfamiliar peoples. They seem closer to the sky. They mark the place where the flat, measurable plain gives way to vertical mystery. A mountain range is a boundary even before mythology touches it. Now take the sea. To someone living near river systems and marshlands, the open sea is not only water, it is distance without roads, depth without fields, motion without walls. It connects lands through trade, but it also threatens with storms, shipwreck, and disappearance. Salt water cannot be drunk. It does not behave like a canal. It resists the kind of control that made Sumerian agriculture possible. The sea is a boundary because it refuses domestication. Now take the desert. The desert is not a wall, but it can function like one. It separates populations. It tests travelers. It reduces life to water, shade, direction, and endurance. Its emptiness can feel inhabited by invisible threat. It makes distance dangerous. It turns the horizon into uncertainty. The desert is a boundary made of absence. These landscapes formed the sensory foundation of Mesopotamian cosmic thought. The world did not need a literal wall when nature already provided several forms of enclosure: mountains to the east and north, sea and marsh to the south, arid zones and steppe beyond cultivated space, and the sky above everything. Earth felt bordered because life itself was bordered. Modern maps flatten this experience. A satellite view shows landforms from above. neutral and measurable. But ancient perception was horizontal and embodied. People encountered the world by walking, sailing, herding, fighting, trading, digging, building, and burying. A boundary was not a line on paper. It was heat, thirst, fear, language difference, guarded passes, rough water, rising flood, or the last visible light on a distant ridge. This is why the horizon mattered so much. The horizon is the first wall every human sees. It is not solid, yet it stops vision. It moves as we move, always promising more and withholding it. Ancient people did not need to think the horizon was a literal edge to feel its power. It was the place where the known world became invisible. The sun entered there. The stars emerged there. Travelers disappeared there. Armies came from there. Storms gathered there. The horizon is a boundary made of perception, and perception creates myth. A child watching the sun disappear beyond the western edge does not see planetary rotation. A farmer watching clouds rise beyond distant land does not see atmospheric systems. A priest watching an eclipse does not see orbital mechanics. They see signs, entrances, warnings, absences, and returns. Their world is not false. It is experienced differently. This helps explain why ancient cosmology often feels both geographic and symbolic. The boundary around Earth may have grown from accumulated encounters with real limits, the mountain no one easily crosses, the sea no one fully measures, the desert that kills the unprepared, the underworld opened by every grave, the sky no ladder reaches. The real landscape provided the grammar, myth wrote the story. This does not reduce the mystery. It makes it more human. The Sumerians transformed their world into cosmic architecture because their landscape demanded constant interpretation. Every canal was a negotiation with water. Every wall was a negotiation with violence. Every temple was a negotiation with divine distance. Every trade route was a negotiation with the unknown. Every burial was a negotiation with death. A people who lived by negotiating boundaries would naturally imagine the universe as a system of boundaries. The wall around Earth. Then, maybe the memory of geography enlarged until it became sacred. Mountains became the rim of the world. Seas became encircling waters. Deserts became outer silence. Temples became artificial peaks. Graves became gates below. The sky became the ceiling of divine order. And still, the transformation is not purely poetic. Real landscapes can generate real fear. A flood does not become harmless because it becomes myth. A desert does not stop killing because it becomes symbolic. A mountain pass does not stop being dangerous because it becomes sacred. Myth does not replace reality. It preserves the emotional truth of reality. That may be why these ancient images lasted. They were not arbitrary fantasies. They were built from repeated human encounters with limits. The Sumerian scribe did not need to invent a bounded world from imagination alone. The world already felt bounded by every journey, every season, every death, every import from distant lands, every storm beyond the horizon, every city wall built against attack, every ritual gate opened with care. The cosmos became a map of human vulnerability. What did archaeology find? City walls, canals, temples, tablets, graves, trade goods, and evidence of contact across vast regions. What did ancient texts describe gods, waters, gates, mountains, heavens, underworlds, and cosmic order? What do historians suggest that mythic geography often grows from lived landscapes, ritual systems, political centers, and inherited storytelling. What do modern interpretations sometimes add? The dramatic claim that ancient people described literal hidden structures around the planet. A claim that goes beyond the evidence. The real mystery is quieter, but deeper. How did mud brick cities on a river plain create one of the world's earliest written visions of a bounded universe? Perhaps because their entire civilization was an act of boundary making. They turned marsh into field, clay into tablet, river into canal, settlement into city, ruler into sacred king, death into ritual, sky into omen, and landscape into cosmos. They did not need to discover a wall around Earth. They lived inside a world where every form of order already felt like a wall against disappearance. And if the cosmic boundary began as memory of real landscapes, why do later ages keep turning those ancient borders into secrets the scribes never plainly wrote? Why do modern people keep turning ancient boundaries into hidden machines? The ancient records speak of waters, heavens, mountains, gates, divine decrees, underworld paths, guarded thresholds, and the frightening outside of order. But somewhere between the clay tablet and the internet age, a transformation happens. A mythic boundary becomes a physical wall. A cosmic ocean becomes a secret barrier. A divine gate becomes technology. A symbolic enclosure becomes evidence of a concealed structure around Earth. This modern reading is powerful because it feels like discovery. It offers a thrilling possibility. Perhaps ancient scribes knew something modern authorities deny. Perhaps mythology is not symbolic memory, but encoded fact. Perhaps the gods were not gods. Perhaps the heavens were not heavens. Perhaps the wall was not a metaphor. Perhaps the records preserve a truth hidden in plain sight. That feeling is seductive. It turns the reader into an investigator. It turns broken tablets into clues. It turns cautious scholarship into suspicious silence. It turns ambiguity into proof. And most importantly, it turns ancient mystery into a secret that can be unlocked. But this is where the danger begins. Ancient texts do not survive as blank screens for modern imagination. They belong to languages, temples, cities, rituals, scribal schools, political histories, and religious systems. A Sumerian hymn is not a coded engineering manual unless the text itself gives us reason to treat it that way. A myth of cosmic separation is not automatically a report of artificial construction. A boundary in sacred geography is not automatically a physical object in the sky. The problem is not curiosity. Curiosity is necessary. The problem is forcing ancient voices to say what they did not clearly say. A modern misreading often begins with one genuine feature of the evidence. The Mesopotamian world was imagined as structured. True. Ancient texts describe heavens above and depths below. True. Some later maps show the inhabited world encircled by water. True. Myths include gates, guardians, monstrous beings, and cosmic regions. True. Ancient people saw the human world as bounded. True. Then the leap comes. If bounded, then literally walled. If guarded, then technologically controlled. If gods crossed realms, then they must have used advanced devices. If the heavens had structure, then there must be a hidden roof. If ancient language sounds strange, then it must be concealing modern science. The leap is where evidence becomes story. This does not mean ancient texts are simple. They are not. They are strange, layered, and often difficult. But strangeness is not permission to ignore context. In fact, the stranger the text, the more carefully it must be handled. The ancient scribes wrote within a world of temples, offerings, royal power, divine statues, ritual purity, omens, death practices, flood memory, and sacred geography. Their language often worked through images that were real, symbolic, ritual, and cosmic at the same time. When they described the heavens, they were not thinking like modern astrophysicists. When they described the underworld, they were not writing geological survey notes. When they described divine beings, they were not automatically describing astronauts in disguise. That modern reinterpretation says more about us than about Sumer. It reveals our own age's obsessions. We live in a technological civilization, so we reimagine divine power as technology. We live under governments, corporations, satellites, surveillance systems, and restricted information. So we reimagine ancient mystery as suppressed knowledge. We live after spaceflight, so we read heaven as outer space. We live after science fiction, so we turn gods into visitors and temples into launch platforms. We live inside digital networks, so we think secrets must be hidden behind systems. The Sumerians did not live inside that imagination. Their mysteries were different. They feared divine anger, failed harvests, floodwaters, ghosts, demons, foreign invasion, loss of memory, and the collapse of ritual order. They wanted protection, fertility, justice, kingship, communication with gods, proper burial, and continuity after disaster. Their boundaries were not designed to satisfy modern conspiracy. They were designed to explain why the world remained livable. This is not less dramatic. It is more profound. A literal hidden wall around Earth would be a physical mystery. But the ancient boundary is an existential mystery. It asks why life requires separation, why death must be placed below, why heaven must remain distant, why waters must be restrained, why cities must be walled, why knowledge has limits, why humans seem born inside conditions they did not choose. Those questions are older than science fiction. They are older than empires. They are older than the first surviving tablets. The modern misreading also flattens the ancient gods. It often turns them into only one thing: misunderstood engineers, aliens, rulers, or hidden elites. But the gods of Sumerian and Mesopotamian religion were far richer than that. They were divine personalities, cosmic functions, city patrons, sources of fear and blessing, embodiments of natural forces, guardians of social order, and subjects of hymns, laments, myths, and rituals. To reduce them to technology is not to reveal the ancient world. It is to replace it. The same happens with the word wall. In modern speech, a wall is usually a structure made to block movement. But ancient boundary language can include city walls, temple walls, cosmic separations, ritual restrictions, watery limits, horizon imagery, and mythic thresholds. A single modern word can trap a much wider ancient idea. So the responsible question is not, did the Sumerians reveal a secret wall around the planet? The better question is, why did Mesopotamian civilization describe reality through boundaries so often? That question leads back into evidence instead of away from it. It allows the ancient material to remain mysterious without making false promises. It lets water be water and symbol. It lets the sky be sky and divine realm. It lets the underworld be mythic destination and ritual concern. It lets mountains be geography and sacred threshold. It lets the city wall be military defense and cosmic metaphor. Real ancient thought is not smaller than modern speculation. It is stranger because it does not divide reality in the way we do. A temple could be brick, economy, ritual, divine residence, political center, and cosmic axis all at once. A tablet could be clay, writing, memory, administration, sacred literature, and survival across time. A boundary could be physical, social, spiritual, and cosmic in one image. The modern mistake is not imagining too much. It is imagining too narrowly. It wants the wall to be one hidden object. The ancient mind allowed the wall to be a pattern running through existence. This difference matters for the listener standing at the edge of the mystery. A false certainty may feel exciting for a moment, but it closes the door too quickly. It says the answer is a secret structure. The ancient evidence says something more haunting. The human world has always been imagined as fragile, enclosed, guarded, and threatened by what lies beyond order. One answer ends the search. The other deepens it. Perhaps that is why the old tablets still attract modern reinterpretation. They contain enough fragments to awaken wonder, enough silence to invite projection, enough cosmic imagery to feel vast, and enough unfamiliar language to resist easy understanding. They do not speak in modern categories, so modern categories rush in to claim them. But the tablets do not need to be forced. They already ask questions that remain alive. What is the edge of the known world? What keeps chaos away? Why do humans die? Why do floods come? Why do gods seem near and unreachable at the same time? Why does civilization require walls? Why is knowledge partial? Why do we fear what waits beyond the horizon? These are not weak mysteries. They are the foundation of civilization's oldest storytelling. The modern misreading searches for a wall and often misses the deeper enclosure. It looks for a physical barrier and overlooks the ancient vision of a world protected by divine order, ritual structure, sacred geography, memory, and fear. It looks for something hidden above earth and misses what the texts place all around human life limits. And once that is understood, the final mystery becomes sharper. If the ancient wall was not a secret structure in the sky, but a sacred pattern surrounding human existence, why does that pattern still feel true even in a world that believes it has no edge? Why does the idea of a boundary still haunt us? The ancient scribes did not leave a simple confession saying they knew of a literal wall built around the planet. The evidence does not support that kind of certainty. What they left is more elusive and in many ways more powerful. A vision of human existence surrounded by limits. Heaven above, earth in the middle, the dead below, waters at the edge, mountains at the horizon, temples at the center, gates between realms, guardians at thresholds, chaos waiting wherever order begins to weaken. That is the real ancient mystery. Not a wall of stone circling Earth, but a world imagined as protected, structured, and dangerously fragile. A world where life could continue only because certain divisions remained intact. The gods had their realm. The dead had theirs. Waters had their banks. Cities had their walls. Temples had their sacred chambers. Human beings had their place, their duties, their rituals, and their limits. In the beginning, the question seemed almost physical. Was there a wall around Earth? But the older question is stranger. Why did one of the world's first literate civilizations imagine reality as something that needed boundaries at all? The answer begins in the landscape. Sumer was not a paradise of effortless abundance. It was a vulnerable civilization built from mud, water, labor, calculation, and faith. Its people turned river plains into fields by controlling canals. They turned clay into tablets to preserve memory. They turned settlements into cities by raising walls. They turned sacred fear into ritual. They turned the unknown into myth. Every achievement depended on holding something back. Too much water, and fields vanished. Too little water, and crops died. Too little divine favor, and the city feared abandonment. Too much divine force, and humans trembled. Too little memory, and names disappeared. Too much contact with the dead, and the living world became unsafe. The Sumerian cosmos reflected this fragile balance. It was not a universe of emptiness. It was a universe of pressure. Forces pressed from above, below, and beyond. The world had to be arranged so that life could exist in the middle. This is why boundaries mattered so deeply. They were not only defenses, they were conditions for existence. A boundary made the city possible. A boundary made ritual possible. A boundary made identity possible. A boundary made human life possible. This gives the ancient idea its emotional force. To live inside a boundary is to be protected, but also limited. The wall that keeps danger out also reminds you that danger exists. The gate that allows passage also reminds you that passage is controlled. The sky that displays divine signs also reminds you that heaven remains unreachable. The grave that gives death a place also reminds you that every life moves toward that place. Protection and imprisonment can look strangely similar from the inside. Was humanity sheltered? Was humanity confined? Was the ordered world a gift, a duty, or a carefully managed enclosure? The ancient texts do not answer with one voice. Some myths describe gods creating or organizing human life. Some traditions emphasize service to the gods. Some celebrate cities, temples, kingship, wisdom, fertility, and craft. Others tremble before flood, death, divine anger, and the underworld. Together, they create a picture of humanity as precious, useful, vulnerable, and bounded. This is not a simple doctrine. It is a tension. Humans were close enough to the gods to serve them, receive signs, build temples, and preserve sacred stories. Yet humans were far enough from the gods to die, suffer, misunderstand, and remain excluded from the highest knowledge. They lived beneath heaven, above the dead, between blessing and disaster. That middle position is the heart of the mystery, the wall around Earth. If understood through Sumerian and Mesopotamian imagination, was not built to keep out one creature or one hidden enemy. It was built against collapse, against the return of unbounded water, against the invasion of death into life, against chaos without name, against wilderness without measure, against divine force without mediation, against forgetting, against the terrifying possibility that the order humans depend on might not hold forever. And yet, the boundary was never completely silent. Signs crossed it, dreams crossed it, omens crossed it, storms crossed it, rituals reached toward it. The dead received offerings across it. The sun traveled along its hidden roads. Gods descended through temples. Myths carried human imagination to its edges. This is what makes the ancient vision so haunting. The boundary was real enough to limit humanity, but permeable enough to keep humanity wondering. It closed the world, yet filled it with messages. It kept humans in their place, yet tempted them to look beyond. Perhaps that is why the idea survives. Modern people no longer stand under the same sky with the same beliefs. We know Earth is a planet. We know the sun does not pass through mountain gates. We know floods have physical causes. We know the stars are distant suns, not lamps set in a divine ceiling. We have mapped coastlines, crossed deserts, climbed mountains, entered the atmosphere, and photographed Earth from space. And still, the old feeling has not disappeared. We still live inside boundaries we cannot fully explain. The visible universe has a horizon. Death remains a threshold. Memory still fails. Civilization still depends on systems that can break. Water still rises. Cities still fall. Languages still vanish. The body still has limits. Knowledge still reaches an edge and finds silence. The Sumerian scribes pressed signs into clay because they wanted something to endure. They named gods, kings, offerings, cities, fields, floods, journeys, and the dead. They preserved fragments of a worldview in which the human realm was surrounded by powers larger than itself. They did not give us a final answer. They gave us a map of ancient anxiety, a circle of order, a ring of danger, a center that must be maintained, an outside that cannot be ignored. So the greatest revelation is not that the Sumerians secretly described a physical wall around Earth. The greater revelation is that they imagined existence itself as a protected enclosure, and they understood that what protects us also defines us. Maybe every civilization builds its own version of that wall. Some build it from brick, some from ritual, some from laws, some from maps, some from science, some from stories, some from silence. But the question remains older than all of them. If human life has always been lived inside a fragile circle of order, what is waiting beyond the boundary we have not yet learned how to see?